Good morning. This is our final call. The program is about to begin. Please take your seats. Thank you. Muy buenos días. Esta es nuestra última llamada. El simposio está a punto de comenzar. Por favor, tomen sus asientos. Gracias. café está.
Dale, papá, gracias.
Okay.
El de la mañana sí que no puedo.
¿No tiene un mallete para...?
¿Estás bien?
Yo, para pasarlo abajo. Hola, hola. ¿Quieren café, Visa? Café.
Bien.
Hola. Buenos días. Hola, está un placer. Un placer. Saludos.
Bien, Suset.
Okay.
Buenos días, Gretchen Howe. Placer representar.
Good morning. Buenos días a todos y gracias por estar aquí hoy. Welcome. Joining us today for the 2026 Puerto Rico Economic Forecast Symposium here at the Leopoldo Figueroa Hall in the Capitolio and online on our live stream, which you can find it at theoversight.board.pr.gov. The audio of this meeting is also going to be available in English and in Spanish simultaneous translation online. And this symposium is also going to be translated into sign language. Yo soy Roberto Mujica, Robert Mujica, Executive Director of the Financial Oversight Board and Management Board for Puerto Rico. And this is the second year that we are convening this important symposium to inform Puerto Rico's financial planning and budget process. Reforms such as these are about building a transparent and credible foundation for Puerto Rico's budget and fiscal future before decisions are made, not after. And this is why this symposium is a critical element of transforming the process of how Puerto Rico's government develops a budget going forward. This is a critical year for Puerto Rico's government and the budget process and this transformation. The government and the Oversight Board have begun implementing a co-leadership model to develop a consensual budget in partnership with the Puerto Rico Office of Management and Budget, OJP. In parallel, we are also working with Hacienda, the Treasury Office regarding revenues and taxes, forecasting, and accounting practices. That means initiating the transfer of knowledge, processes, and responsibilities for fiscal and budget matters to the government in preparation for the eventual departure of the board. A consensus view on how the economy in the United States overall and in Puerto Rico performs is an essential part of the budget process. This symposium is a well-established practice used by more than half of the U.S. states. The purpose is to ground decisions in a shared, independent economic forecasts, and if we want responsible budgets, you need to start with an honest, transparent discussion and view of the economy. The economy is a significant factor that is used to assess credit risks by the rating agencies of the U.S. states, local governments, and territories. And Puerto Rico cannot fix its credit without fixing confidence. And confidence starts with credible budgets built on credible economic assumptions. Puerto Rico is institutionalizing this best practice, and this is how we transition from crisis budgeting to institutional budgeting. And this open, transparent public exchange is an opportunity for Puerto Rico's legislative leadership to hear from this distinguished group of economists and evaluate for themselves whether the budget that they will receive from the governor and the Oversight Board this year reflects their own perspective on how the economy of Puerto Rico will support the expenditures that they will have to approve. Before we dive into the subject, I want to thank the leaders of Puerto Rico's Legislative Assembly for hosting us here in this magnificent house of the people of Puerto Rico, particularly the Senate President, Tomás Rivera Schatz, for providing this room. I also want to thank the Speaker, Johnny Mendez, who is not here yet, but we have a seat reserved for him right here as soon as he arrives. I want to thank the Senate Vice President, who's sitting next to me, Marisita Jimenez, and Senate Majority Leader Gregorio Matias, for being, who's also on his way. and the Senate President who's going to be, these are representing the Senate President who's not going to be here today. I want to thank the leaders and ranking members of the respective finance committees for being here, particularly Senator Migdalia Padilla, Jose Luis Dalmau, Representatives Eddie Charbonnier, Gretchen Howe, Executive Director of the Legislative Assembly Budget Office, Herquian Martinez, and the executive branch, which is represented by the Treasury Secretary and my colleague, Angel Pantoja Rodriguez, and the Executive Director of the Office of Management and Budget, Orlando Rivera Berrios. So thank you all for being here. We have Hector Morales Martinez, who leads the Puerto Rico Planning Board, who is expected to be here as well. In addition, in the room, we have the Honorable Rafael Hernandez, the Honorable Jesus Santa, former chair of the committee, the Honorable Gabriel Rodriguez Aguilo, and the Honorable Joel Frankie Atiles. We have the Insurance Commissioner, Suzette DeValle, sitting in front of me, the President of UPR, Dr. Zaira Jordan, and the Honorable Angel Morey from the House, and Josiah Jimenez as well. As presenters today, we have Leslie Adames, Director of the División de Análisis y Política de Economía de Estudios Técnicos. We have Jose Caraballo Puerto, University Professor at the University of Puerto Rico. And we have Xavier Divi, Director of V2A Consulting. Joining us virtually, we will have Michael Sadinick, an Economics Director at S&P Global Market Intelligence, and Gustavo Rojas Matute, Assistant Director at Moody's Analytics. Last year, we witnessed the beginning of a dramatic and rapid change of government policy in Washington, including significant changes to tariffs and spending, reductions to federal agencies and programs. Economic conditions are changing quickly. Inflation, interest rates, and global trade policy shifts make planning ahead more important than ever, particularly as the temporary federal funding that Puerto Rico has become dependent on starts to fade away. The debate around the effects of tariffs on families and businesses in Puerto Rico and elsewhere continues as a point of contention, and uncertainty around federal funding persists. When we met last year, the positive impact of federal funding on Puerto Rico's economy was the subject of much optimism and concern. Puerto Rico's remarkable post-Maria and post-COVID-19 economic performance was largely due to the influx of federal recovery and stimulus funding. By the fourth calendar year of 2021, employment in all of Puerto Rico's major industrial sectors had surpassed their pre-pandemic peaks and remained strong through 2022 and much of 2023. So we will listen carefully to thoughts and projections by our presenters and sharing their views on all of these issues today. For the current year, in 2026, the Puerto Rico Planning Board estimates that real GNP for Puerto Rico of 0.4%. The Department of Economic Development and Commerce Activities Economic Index points to the first fiscal quarter, which ended on September 30th, with a lower projection of 0.3%, which is actually lower than the same period last year. This could suggest economic stagnation, so I look forward to hearing from the panelists. We expect growth in virtually all of Puerto Rico's industrial sectors to slow further as federal funding continues to wither. So what do our panelists think are going to be the leading sectors in Puerto Rico going forward, and which sectors do we see most at risk as the benefits of federal funding recede over the next few years? The unemployment rate has risen modestly since the start of the current year to 5.7, and we fully expect it to continue to rise. Labor force growth has been largely stagnant. This is just current projections, but we'll hear from our panelists. In the U.S. mainland, the job market is slowing, and we can expect a reacceleration. Can we expect a reacceleration of job creation here on the island, absent a stronger outlook? Welcome, Senator. We look forward to hearing questions on how our panelists will address this question, as well as the critical question on how the Puerto Rico economy can generate more sustaining growth. Tax collections have remained relatively flat and are projected to decrease in 2026 compared to 24 and 25, although they are higher than our projections earlier this year. And we want to understand whether this should be interpreted as a slight decline in economic growth, or are there other reasons for this decline? Also, all of these things have significant implications for the coming fiscal year, which begins on July 1 of 2026. And they also have implications for long-term government priorities, including what form tax reform will take. In 2027, Puerto Rico faces the possibility of a statutory reduction in federal funding for the Medicaid program, unless the extension of current funding is approved by Congress. And we are going to work hand in hand with the government to make sure that that happens. Unless properly designed, any tax reforms can evolve into a reduction in revenues, so we need to pay attention to how those changes are made, and also make adjustments to the budget if that is what we end up doing. I look forward from hearing from our panelists about the budgetary risks we may be facing and to work to rebuild a culture of fiscal integrity and responsibility. We view this symposium as a key feature. We hope that their future symposiums will become part of Puerto Rico's permanent statutory budget framework. At the end of the day, good budgets start with good data. And I'm looking forward to hearing from what our panelists have to say today. I'm going to turn it over to opening remarks from some of the panelists. Let's go to, we have the majority leaders not here. Let's keep going. ¿Tiene alguna palabra? No? Okay.
Buenos días a todos.
Okay. Let's go to the Secretary of Hacienda, Ángel Pantoja.
Muy buenos días, gracias director, gracias por tenerme aquí, al presidente de ambos cuerpos, presidente de la Cámara, el representante Carlos Johnny Méndez y el presidente del Senado Tomás Rivera Chats. Saludos a todos los legisladores que están aquí presentes y demás colegas de la rama ejecutiva y colaboradores. Aquí a la disposición y dispuesto a escuchar cuáles son los planteamientos que los panelistas van a estar presentando de cara a este próximo proceso presupuestario para el año fiscal 2027, así que aquí a sus órdenes. Muchas gracias.
Thank you. With that, I'm going to go to Representative of the House, Eddie Charbonnier. Do you have any comments, remarks?
Sure. Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Mr. Executive Director Mojica. And welcome, everybody, to the best victory in Puerto Rico, first victory of San Juan, my district. So welcome to my home. I want to recognize the members that are here from the House Budget and Finance Committee, Representative Jimenez, Representative Gabriel Rodríguez Aguiló, Representative Joel Franqui, Representative Ángel Morey, Lizzie Burgo, representing the, I don't know how to translate Proyecto Dignidad, Dignity Project, would be my ranking member, my colleague in the House, Gretchen Howe. And one important part of our good work here in the House is OPAL Director Ekira Martinez and the members of the OPAL, which are in the front row. And also want to recognize two former chairmen of this committee, former Speaker Tatito Hernandez, and also my senior advisor in my committee, former representative and former Chairman of this committee, Jesus Santa Rodriguez. It is a privilege to join you in the second time at this 2026 Economic Forecast Symposium. I want to thank you, the FOMB, for convening this space once again, and also acknowledge the participation of the governor's fiscal team, my colleagues from the House and the Senate, and the distinguished panel of experts joining us today. For those of us who carry the responsibility of shaping public policy, moments like this are vital. Puerto Rico economic landscapes continue to evolve amid global uncertainty, demographic pressure, and the long-term work of fiscal stabilization. To legislate with responsibility, we must ground our decision in credible data, rigorous analysis, and transparent dialogue. This precisely is what this symposium offers and what we should continue to work together. Today's presentation from all of the panels and experts provide more than a forecast. They offer a shared foundation from which the two main branches of government and the oversight board can work toward current and realistic economic outlook. This shared understanding and essential as we prepare for the government's budget and the coming fiscal year to evaluate tax reform proposals and continue advancing the Puerto Rico fiscal transformation. As policymakers, we know that the members alone do not determine our future. What matters is how we interpret them and how we respond to risk and how we prepare for economic downfalls and how we seize opportunity from long-term growth. That requires collaboration, discipline, and commitment. Puerto Rico deserves a government that plans with clarity, acts with responsibility, and builds with a vision. Thank you for all the presenters and the participants for contributing to your information and expertise. I look forward to a productive and insightful conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Next, we're going to go to Orlando Rivera Berrios, the Executive Director of OGP, the Office of Management and Budget. Orlando.
Buenos días a todos. Me uno al saludo protocolar de todos los presentes. Muy honrado de estar aquí, ¿verdad? Y escuchar lo que va a presentar la Junta de Supervisión Fiscal relacionado a todo lo que es macroeconómico. Tengo que mencionar que la planificación presupuestaria del 2026 inició desde el mes de agosto del año pasado y ha sido con una apertura y colaboración por parte de la Junta de Supervisión Fiscal. Tengo que mencionar que creo que ha sido una apertura para beneficio de nuestra oficina, el poder conocer cómo ellos hacen ciertos análisis y poder transferir todo ese conocimiento a nuestra oficina. Creo que ha sido una planificación presupuestaria distinta a años anteriores, mejorando el proceso de planificación, buscando cuáles son esos ingresos recurrentes y que estén atados a gastos recurrentes y evitar que gastos no recurrentes se aten a fondos que no son recurrentes. Estamos en una mejor posición de presentar un presupuesto para el 2026, el cual el que está corriendo, ¿verdad?, fue certificado por la Junta de Supervisión Fiscal, así que entendemos que analizando todos los riesgos que estamos compartiendo, tanto ellos con nosotros y nosotros con ellos, podemos estar en una mejor posición para el presupuesto del 2027 y agradecidos de la apertura que ha tenido la Junta de Supervisión Fiscal.
Gracias, Director. Now we're going to go to Senator José Luis Dalmau, Senate Minority Leader for the Finance Committee.
Muchas gracias, buenos días a todos y qué bueno que están aquí. Gracias por la invitación. Nosotros en la Asamblea Legislativa somos los últimos que nos enteramos de los cambios que se van a hacer para el próximo presupuesto. Acaban de escuchar a los compañeros del gobierno diciendo que se están reuniendo desde agosto, qué bueno. Pero sea el gobierno que sea, la legislatura se entera cuando se radica el presupuesto apenas 2 meses antes de que cierre la sesión. Y la presión nos cae encima de nosotros porque tenemos 60 días para evaluar lo que todo el mundo tuvo un año. Y qué bueno que están mis compañeros legisladores aquí también, porque es bueno que tengamos la información de antemano para poderla analizar responsablemente y las ideas y las enmiendas que surjan poder atenderlas. Sé que es importante que se haya dado este foro, se los agradecemos y estamos aquí listos para escuchar las propuestas y el desarrollo económico que nos espera presentar para el próximo año fiscal.
Gracias, Senador. Next, let me welcome Representative Gretchen Howe, who's also the Minority Leader for the Finance Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Mojica. Good morning to everyone. Thank you for being present in this important discussion. As we members of the Assembly here in Puerto Rico and being member of the Ways and Means Committee, it's very important for us to continue and talking through all these important topics that we have been discussing right now, and now we're going into a new fiscal year budget. So thank you for the members of the board to be here present, and for all the public and private sectors to be in contribution to keep the information flowing. And it's important for us to have transparency. It's important for us to have the right numbers. It's important for all of us to have the projections so we can work together and make something in the right direction. We have two topics right now going on, tax reform and the upcoming budget. So we need to keep all information flowing so we can do a more precise job here in the Assembly with all the members. Senate, thank you for the senators to be here. I subscribe the words from Dalmau that we're the last ones to always receive the information, but being present means that we have a very high responsibility and we're willingness to keep on talking about this matter. Thank you for all being present, and hope it's very important for we're about to.
Gracias, Representante Howe. Okay, before, I think we've got all the acknowledgements here. The Planning Board, I don't think, is present yet, so we're going to move on. I want to acknowledge and thank all of the government and legislative officials, right, that are accompanying us today. I know the team behind this team are critically important and do much of the work. And when we're sitting at this table, there's a lot of work that goes on behind. So I want to thank all of those who are here, including our colleagues at the Oficina de Presupuesto de la Asamblea en OPAL, and for dedication and their important work for support and planning for Puerto Rico's budget, and all the teams behind OGP and Hacienda and the FOMB teams as well. Only by working together can we actually make progress. With that, I want to turn the floor over to our first presenter, and that is going to be Michael Sadnick of S&P Global, who will be joining us virtually. Michael, can you hear us?
I can. Can you hear me?
Perfect. Yes. You can go. You can begin when you're ready.
Excellent. Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Robert, for the kind introduction. I would also like to thank the FOMB for the opportunity to be here today and to share part of our outlook for the U.S. economy with you. As you said, my name is Michael Sadinick, and I'm a director on the U.S. economics team at S&P Global Market Intelligence, where I'm responsible for the forecast of retail sales and consumer spending. I was asked here today to talk to you about the factors impacting our estimates of GDP growth in 2026 and beyond, and to do that, I brought with me our baseline forecast for January. Now, as a macroeconomist, I'll be painting with a broad brush today, focusing on the data and drivers that inform our outlook for U.S. growth broadly. But I'll be doing this with an eye towards leaving time at the end for you to ask questions so we can focus on the issues most relevant to your symposium. So, without further delay, let's get started. First slide, please. Now, as was said, last year was an unusually uncertain time for business and economic forecasts. And we're talking not just about the impact of policy, but the very direction of it. And that uncertainty showed up several ways in the data. There were swings in the GDP source data, the question of where tariff rates would ultimately settle, the question about the very impact of so much uncertainty on business investment and spending, and of course, we ended the year with the questions around the impacts of the fall's government shutdown. All of these things impacted our outlook for 2025 and made the job of planning for the future unusually difficult. Next slide. But instead, we got a pleasant surprise, and the U.S. economy proved surprisingly resilient. Back in April, a recession looked almost imminent. Markets reacted badly to the announced reciprocal tariffs, and policy uncertainty spiked. But the administration paused those tariffs and reintroduced them later. Yes, at slightly lower levels, but now markets appear to be unfazed by this. So at least part of what we're seeing here, part of what's going on, is the fact that expectations around the impacts of tariffs have become much more sanguine. And the other half of the story is around the declining in policy uncertainty. Levels are still elevated, but overall we're back to a level where we are around the end of 2024. Next slide, please. Which brings us to our outlook for today and to our outlook for 2026, which I would describe as broadly optimistic relative to where we were 6 or 9 months ago. Yes, policy uncertainty remains elevated, but it has declined, and there's no recession in our baseline forecast. The tailwinds that support growth remain, and I've listed those for you here in the right-hand panel, while the headwinds dragging on growth have dissipated somewhat in the second half of 2025. On the left, you see how it all adds up, and you can see undeniably the swings in imports and exports that led to very volatile growth in the first half of 2025. Now let's talk about several of these factors. And we'll start with the reasons for optimism. Last year's budget bill, known as the OBBBA, or the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, included a large personal tax cut, part of which was retroactive to 2025. So not only will personal tax holdings be reduced in 2026, refunds will also increase earlier this year. And in our view, this should help support disposable personal income and consumer spending through the first half of 2026. On the right-hand panel, that budget bill also included new direct federal spending on both defense and border security that will boost government consumption expenditures and gross investment above our policy baseline pre-OBBA. Next slide. Other tailwinds that are supporting growth this year. Rates are coming down and the mortgage spread is narrowing, which should support development in the housing market. We also believe that aggregate inventories for businesses are likely underbuilt, and at some point this year, business will have to increase production to rebuild these inventories and set this on an upwardly rising path. Finally, one tailwind I'd like to mention, but which is not shown here, is that we expect domestic producers to redirect some of that domestic demand to domestic producers where extra capacity is available. So since imports will be relatively more expensive, that there will be an opportunity there for reinvestment. And this should also add to our outlook for growth. Next slide, please. All right, turning to the factors expected to drag on growth in 2026. As was mentioned, tariffs have been slow to pass through to consumer prices, and we expect that there's still more pass-through to come. Recent data on inflation supports our decision to slow the pass-through of tariffs to consumer prices, but inflation remains stubbornly high, and we expect core PC inflation to remain elevated through 2026. Next slide, please. And above target inflation segues next into our other headwind, which is the fact that after cutting the policy rate by 75 basis points the last 3 meetings of the year, we expect the Federal Reserve to hold rates steady through the first half. And they'll be doing this with an eye towards making sure that the inflationary response from these tariffs is, in fact, transitory. And so while rates have come down in recent months, they've not fallen as quickly as we would have expected otherwise. Next slide, please. Going quickly over a few other headwinds in our forecast. Higher real borrowing costs and reduced business fixed investment. The corporations are facing the highest real borrowing cost in 15 years, and that's, of course, going to weigh on investment. It makes it more expensive. Next slide. And again, I'm including these not to dwell on them, but so they're for your reference. So we have the good data available that informs our forecast. But other headwinds that we have are the diminished fiscal tailwinds that have been supporting growth from the end of the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, and the Investments in Jobs Act, both of which supported clean energy tax credits, which have been rescinded, and local growth, local government, federal government spending. Next slide. At the same time, the price of risk is expected to rise in 2026. This is going to drag on growth. You've already seen this in the higher real borrowing costs that corporations are facing, but another place that will show up, our credit spreads are forecast to rise, back to more near their historical norms. And at the same time, our forecast includes a rise in the equity premium that's expected to weigh on equities. We're not taking a stand on where the decline in equities is coming from. This is not a forecast of, is there a bubble in AI tech stocks? It's just broadly that, risk has been underpriced since the pandemic, and we expect those to normalize going forward. Next slide. And all that brings us to our final headwind, which is that immigration is expected to be reduced by about 500,000 people a year over the 4 years of the Trump presidency. And that's an easy way to slow growth. Fewer people means less economic output unless those fewer people are surprisingly productive. And so this is something that we have in our baseline forecast that's going to, again, weigh on our growth prospects for the next couple of years. Now, we just got new estimates from Census, and so These are the data that we have on hand is pretty in line with what's in our current forecast, but we'll be updating this as we go forward. Next slide. When we put it all together, growth slows unevenly in 2026, but is broadly optimistic. It's looking better than it was expected, like I said, 6 or 9 months ago, the last time I think we spoke. Upward revisions to date our forecasts in recent months have been driven by stronger than expected historical data in both the third and likely in the fourth quarter. Third quarter GDP growth came in at 4.3%, and that wasn't just because of the swings in imports and exports. Underlying final sales to domestic purchases has been strong in the last couple of years. So in our forecast, this results in a labor market that bends but doesn't break. So the unemployment rate rises to about 4.7% in 2026. But unless there's some external shock that's going to cause a large decrease in demand that's going to inspire firms to start laying people off in large numbers, we're not seeing the type of shock that would trigger what we believe there to be a recession. Cool. The rest of the slides that I have for you are mainly for your reference. This shows what is driving the slowdown in GDP growth broadly, which is a decline in PCE, consumption, real spending. This is because real wealth growth is slowed, and rising price pressures, growth of real DPI has slowed as well, again, exacerbated by slowing wage growth. The last couple things I have for you are just the numbers from our forecast. If you like these for your reference, we update these monthly. We have our key policy assumptions for our forecast, which this is always very important to remember in this sort of budget processing, is set road signs for yourself. Be aware and cognizant of what your assumptions are and how they impact your decision making, and be aware of what it would take for you to change them. What data do you need to see incoming that would make you rethink some of these assumptions? And then finally, I think I have for you the hallmarks summarizing the U.S. forecast, which is kind of our narrative explanation. I think we have plenty of time for questions, so I'm happy to talk more about the labor market, but I'd also like to open up the floor for you to ask about what particularly is driving our outlook for the U.S. economy.
Thank you, Director. And just so that everyone understands, the Director, Sadnek, he's the Director of U.S. Economics team for FOMB Global Market Intelligence. He leads the forecasting for U.S. consumer markets, for spending, income, and prices, and develops the analysis for linking the U.S. economy to household and consumer sector trends. So thank you. You took us on a little bit of an arc during that presentation to where we ended up. If there's no questions now, we can go to questions later, but if we have some, if there, okay. All right, then thank you, and we're going to go to our next presenter. You do? Okay, I'm sorry, the secretary here of Hacienda has a couple questions.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Hi. In terms of the personal consumption expenditures, you mentioned that has decreased, let's say for the last year. Do you have identified the drivers on that decrease? And my second question would be on the disposable income, the last chart that you presented at the end of the presentation. How would you address the decrease in disposable income for personal disposable income, considering what the economic behavior in 2025 and going forward? How would you, what do you foresee is going to happen in that end?
Yeah. No, that's a fantastic question, and the question that I expected to get right off the bat today is, there's been a lot of concern about jobs right now. What's going on in the labor market, and what's our expectations for the future? And yes, it's clear job gains have slowed, and in fact, tomorrow we're going to get new data from the BLS that's likely to revise down estimates of payroll employment gains since March of 2024. So an already soft labor market may soon look even softer, and that is really the connection between jobs and income that's going to drive, that decline in disposable personal income and consumer expenditures. Those two things are linked. If we look at the data more closely, consumers are broadly, treading water. Spending has risen in line with incomes, but not anymore. They're not taking on debt because they're worried about future financial prospects after deleveraging following COVID, and they're not spending beyond their means. But they're also not cutting back yet because unemployment rate at 4% for the U.S. is still not anywhere near a level where the impact on spending is going to be seen in the aggregate data. So what the real question that we have here, the issue that we're trying to reconcile is how do we frame the slowdown in hiring with the solid growth that we're seeing? And there's three things I can say there. That hiring is slow because firms are broadly still hanging on to their existing workers. Layoffs have started to increase, but we're still seeing net job gains, particularly in sectors that are insulated from a lot of parts of the business cycle, like healthcare, and that's driven by demographic change. But also growth has been solid because productivity has been fairly robust coming out of the pandemic the last couple of years. Now, I'm not saying that that's AI showing up in the data yet, but we're starting to see businesses who are getting a lot out of their current workforce, and so there's not a lot of pressure for them to add hiring there, but growth still is solid. Finally, with the slowdown in population growth, we need less new jobs every month, every year to make up for. To keep the unemployment rate steady. That's known as the break-even rate. So going forward, the next couple of years, we'll see actually this dichotomy where less hiring can still lead to fairly solid growth because there's not quite the demand that there was there previously, or the supply of labor. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Director. Thank you very much. Very insightful.
Thank you so much. Good luck today, everyone.
Thank you. And these presentations, just so everyone, there's a lot of information in them. We're going to be posting them on the Oversight Board's website, so you'll be able to access them. Next, we have Gustavo Rojas Matute. He's visiting us again this year from last year. Gustavo is the Assistant Director of Moody's Analytics. He brings more than 20 years of experience advising international corporations, financial institutions, and policymakers across the United States and Latin America, with a focus on monetary policy, macroeconomic forecasting, and data-driven analysis. So with that, Gustavo, can you hear us? Oh, there we go. I see you.
Yes.
I see you now.
Perfectly.
I see you now. Great.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you perfectly. So
Yeah.
you can get started when you're ready.
Thank you. Thank you, Director. And the only thing is that unfortunately, I'm not there in Puerto Rico right now, but just on the distance. But thank you very much to the Junta and all the organizers of this event for this year. So I'm going to focus today most on the Puerto Rican economy directly. We already heard some of the insights from Michael, and I think there is a relative consensus regarding what is going to happen or the outlook for the United States for the economy of the mainland. So I'm going to start focus directly on what is going on in Puerto Rico. So in my agenda, the first point is going to be what the recent performance, what we have so far with the data. And then I'm going to focus on threats and opportunities, as I see that the Puerto Rican economy right now, it's facing a turning point. There are a couple of immediately threats on the Puerto Rican economy that needs to be in a certain way addressed. One is a significant reliance on federal funds, we know that, and the other one is the population, the current situation of the population. There is a declining population in the long run, and that is going to be one of the main threats for the Puerto Rican economy. So, Director Mujica at the beginning was asking what are the main drivers of the economy right now. We still have seen since the pandemic. I'm not saying that the Puerto Rican economy started actually with the pandemic, but this is just an index or a reference point that we are using here. It's what happened right after the pandemic, or we are using the pandemic or February 2020 actually as the index. And we can see here the main two drivers. There are three main drivers that we can actually see in this chart. The first one is construction, which as we know, it's a fuel by federal funds. We still see some job gains in the construction sector. Actually, this year was quite positive in that terms, as we can see the green line at the top of the chart. It was a very good year, despite all the uncertainties that we had last year, at the beginning of last year, regarding the potential it's a transportation housing, but its area is more driver, of course, store material areas that are in the construction sector. But last year had actually very good year. Last year in May, when we met in May last year, we talked about the potential effects of the Bad Bunny residency, etc. And it was a very good. Can we go back to the previous one? All right. So it was a very good year with the 30 concerts, and also because the Puerto Rican economy had already that good trend. But there are a couple of things here. The first one is that the main driver, which is construction, it's relies mainly on federal funds, on the disbursement of federal funds. And the second one, which is leisure and hospitality, depends, or the visitors that are coming to the island, depends heavily on the job markets of the U.S. So that is a main problem, because as we can see, Michael just talked about that, we are seeing a slowdown in the job market in the mainland, and we are seeing potentially less visitors to the island in the coming year. So now we can move to the next slide. And as we can see, this is a comparison of the monthly passengers that are going to San Juan, the Luis Muñoz Marin International Airport. During the Bad Bunny residency, July, August, September, we saw positive numbers, even compared with 2024. But now we are still seeing some signs of softening of that the numbers of tourism are probably softening right now. All right, so let's move to the next slide. All right. The economic activity index for Puerto Rico, it's a kind of puzzle for analysts, because there are some very good data for 5 regarding the economy, payrolls, job gains, etc. Despite there was a slight increase in the unemployment rate, the economy was supposed to perform relatively well last year. However, the data from the economic activity index reflects something different. It was basically under negative territory during almost all the year. Only the data is right now up to October and November. Only October and November reflect some positive growth rate at the end of the year. So it's a kind of positive, but it's sending, mixed results here. The data is sending mixed results here. Is a kind of confusing though. So we will need to wait until the releases of the next GDP to see if actually that data from the economic activity index is matching with the final GDP from the government of Puerto Rico, when the government of Puerto Rico released the data. Next slide, please. All right, so as Director Mojica also mentioned at the beginning of this conference, the unemployment rate has been increasing. It has been increasing also in parallel with the U.S. economy, of the unemployment rate of the U.S. economy. But we still see that the unemployment rate will kind of remain around historical low levels of 6% or so in the coming year. So at least until the end of the decade. One of that of the reason is that in our baseline, we still have that the federal funds will continue to be disbursed until 2035, which is the timeline that the junta has shown in their projections. So we are not going to see potential effects. I mean, when we talk about the federal funds, of course, our government spending in economics, we talk about the multiplier effects of the fiscal or the fiscal multiplier effects, which is would you increase the spending, and then there is going to be an effect on the economic growth. However, this occurs when the economy is unemployed. I mean, when there are significant levels of resources that are currently unemployed, and then you start putting into the economy again. However, when the economy reach such level, which is basically the 6%, it's a historical law, is basically telling us that the economy is operating at full employment. And therefore, the effects are basically fading. So we are going to see some job gains still in the construction sector, or at least they are going to maintain some of those jobs because of the disbursement of federal funds. However, what we are not going to see is effects in the economic side, in the GDP, because the economy is already operating at full employment, and therefore there are no effects of putting more money into the economy when all the factors are already being used. So that is one of the main concerns we have right now regarding the Puerto Rican economy. So next slide. So therefore, we have a very weak forecast for the GDP in the coming years. This forecast is not very different from what we projected last year, has not changed significantly. It's very weak. This is in terms of level, as we can see here is the index of the GDP. But the main, if we see the green line, which is our current January 2026 baseline, it's very flat. It's slightly better than we projected in September in our baseline September, because our model is a top-down model. It depends also on the U.S. economy, and the U.S. economy slightly improved the outlook because of lower tariff. So that is also being to translate into a better GDP in the United States, also a better GDP in Puerto Rico too. So, but still, if you see the growth rate, in terms of the growth rate are basically very weak. We are seeing growth rate less than 1%, less than 0.5% in the coming years until the end of this decade. And in comparison with other states and territories of the United States, Puerto Rico will continue to underperform in that sense when compared to others, other states and territories of the mainland. So the other factor, the other line you see here is the nowcast, is the red line, is the nowcast that we use by using the economic activity index. So as you saw in the previous slide, the economic activity index was showing that the economy was in negative territory last year. So if that is the case, we will actually be seeing a negative growth rate in the fiscal year 2025. So, but let's wait until the Junta de Planificación, the planning board, actually releases the new data of the GDP to see if they actually match with the economic activity index. Next slide, please. All right, threats and opportunities. So what we have so far here is an economy that depends on basically a couple of sectors, or I'm not going to say it depends only of a couple of sectors, but the drivers currently are just a couple of sectors: construction and leisure and hospitality, which is basically tourism. The rest of the sector, if you remember the first slide I showed, manufacturing, those sectors that are actually professional or business services, those sectors that actually concentrate the most share of employment in Puerto Rico are completely flat. They have been basically, which is, if you see the vaso medio vacío or el vaso medio lleno, in a certain way, is good because those sectors are not declining, but at the same time, those sectors are not growing. But there are some opportunities, for instance, in the manufacturing sector, I want to mention right after that. But the other sectors we need to be try to understand what is going to happen. So next slide is going to show that, next slide, please. Okay, the next slide is going to show eventually that the economy, it's the high reliance on the federal funds.
We go back a couple slides. I think you might not be getting the changes, but they're changing here. So.
Oh, okay. I'm not
yeah.
seeing it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not seeing the.
You're not seeing the changes. So we're on the reliance of federal funds lessons table that shows.
Okay. Yeah. I'm gonna tell you just by memory that what we can see there, it's in that chart, is basically that the economy has become more reliant on federal funds right after the pandemic, and it makes, of course, a total sense, because first we had Hurricane Maria, and then we had the pandemic. Significant increase in the number of federal funds that were being disbursed to the Puerto Rican economy. Right now, I'm not seeing anything here, but you probably are seeing. The good thing is that not the good thing, but what we can notice here in this chart is that the reliance is actually declining. That is something you need to be, I'm not going to say a little worried, but what are the current, factors that, okay, now I have it. All right, so what we say, will continue to be, it's still very high or higher than what it used to be before the pandemic, but it's declining. So is this an opportunity or is this a threat? Well, it's going to depend on what the government and the economic development department are currently doing in order to, reshape the economy, try to take advantage of some of the other factors, additional factors that in order to diversify the economy and find the additional alternatives to the reliance of federal funds. Next slide, please. But there are here, you can see some of the most of the municipalities that actually have a higher reliance on federal funds. Most of them are actually located in the south of the island, as you can see here. So those are some sectors that in terms of local government needs to find alternative in order to overcome that significant reliance. Next slide, please. So one of the opportunities that actually Puerto Rico has right now is take advantage of the tariff policy in areas like the pharmaceutical. So Puerto Rico has an extraordinary infrastructure for the pharmaceutical sector, and actually is quite better than the rest of the U.S. in terms of at least as a share of total employment, as we can see here in this chart. So this is one of the great opportunities that Puerto Rico has as a higher tariff to pharmaceutical are actually could be translated into more benefit for the island. Next slide. Yeah, but one of the other threats that the economy has is actually that the population is getting older. And this is one we can see here at municipal levels. What are the areas that are more critical? But at the same time, when we see the green areas here, those green areas is that where the age, the median age is actually less than 40. We have young people there. Most of them are concentrated or located in areas where there are campuses. So the interaction between manufacturing, new technology, investment, and academia, I mean, the campuses of the universities, is actually a great opportunity to, bring younger people to the island and increase and improve, some of those areas at the same time. Next slide. And finally, AI, it's one of the new potential opportunities, but also at the same time threats that are rising right now. And one of the what we want to show in this chart is that there are some areas or municipalities that are more vulnerable or more exposed to the rise of AI. And most of them is because those sectors like professional and business services are actually more vulnerable to the rise of artificial intelligence. Could potentially be replaced by artificial intelligence in the future. So those are basically, this is my current presentation. So I have some time, I guess, for Q&As.
Yes, Gustavo, this is Efrain Martinez, Director of OPAL. I do have, for the next couple of months to the mainland U.S., and whether do you see inflation in Puerto Rico play differently due to varying factors, or if inflation will be more or less the same? Thank you.
More or less the same than the U.S. You mean?
Yes.
Sorry,
correct,
yes. One of the part it got here. This is a very nice discussion. We actually had a talk with one of your members, Juan Carlos Torres, about the relationship between the inflation in Puerto Rico and the inflation in the mainland, and because some of the data is showing that the inflation in Puerto Rico is actually lower than the mainland, but there are some discussions about that because the current characteristic of the island is that it needs to import all the inputs from the mainland, and therefore there is this belief that should be actually higher than that. So what I can say is that because tariffs are going to affect directly all the prices in the mainland, therefore they should be also being passed through the island at the same time. So I'm not, in terms of change, they should be more or less being affected the same. The only potential benefit that Puerto Rico can get is if Puerto Rico can take advantage of the current tariff policies in order to develop a more the manufacturing area that in order to increase the local production, domestic production, that can also benefit. But in the coming 2 months, 3 months, basically inflation from the mainland would be also passed through inflation to prices in Puerto Rico. That is a fact.
Thank you.
Any other questions any other questions?
I don't got Mr. Director, I don't got a question, but just a quick comment. I'm a member of the CSG, both CSG and NCSL Security Committee member, and we're discussing that reliance on federal fund. And it's not exclusive for Puerto Rico. The state have the same reliance on federal funds as Puerto Rico. Just a quick fact, the same number. I know we should look forward to a different practice, but it's the same number of states and the territories.
Yeah. I think the distinction might be if you actually look at recurring federal funds, Puerto Rico is actually the same, if not maybe even a little lower in some places, actually, as some of the states, actually. On recurring federal funds, I think they actually might be even a little lower than some states, probably because of Medicaid and some of the other factors. But as a result of the emergency funds, which includes the temporary funds, that brings the reliance higher because the extraordinary amount of temporary funds, which is just extraordinary because of the weather events that happen. So I think that's a distinction. But when you take out the emergency, Puerto Rico is at or below, actually, compared to other states.
Thank you. That's a question that we have.
That's correct. That's correct. emergency funds or relief programs are actually higher than the rest. But
What was that? I'm sorry. Wait, what was that, Gustavo?
no. Well, exactly what you say. It's the emergency funds or the relief programs that for FEMA, etc., are higher than other states. But that is exactly what you say. I agree with you.
Thank you. Any other questions from the panelists? Any other questions? No. Gustavo, thank you very much. Always very informative. I also just wanted to acknowledge we had a couple of arrivals during that time, so I want to acknowledge the presence of the Senate Majority Leader, Gregorio Matias Rosario. Welcome. And then also, I want to acknowledge that the head of the Planning Board, Hector Morales Martinez, is also joining us. So thank you. Next, we'll go to our next presenter, and that will be Leslie Adames. The focus here is going to be on Puerto Rico's economic conditions. Mr. Adames is the director of the Economic Analysis and Policy Division at Estudios Técnicos and has extensive experience in economic policy, market analysis, economic impact studies, and financial feasibility evaluations. So with that, I turn it over to you. Thank you.
Muchas gracias. Muy buenos días a todos. Para beneficio de todos, la voy a dar en español porque es mucha información, ¿verdad? Y quiero aprovechar el tiempo. Yo creo que debemos empezar con el argumento de que Puerto Rico, sin duda alguna, está enfrentando un entorno económico complicado, ¿no? No creo que eso sea secreto. Yo creo que todos estamos bajo ese entendimiento. El problema es que no es que estamos en un entorno económico complicado, es que las estadísticas, si nos enfocamos a nivel granular, nos presentan una historia un poco más delicada de lo que realmente nosotros pues hemos estado escuchando por ahí. Entonces empecemos por el mercado laboral, ¿no? Es un hecho que el empleo ha estado creciendo. Al cierre de diciembre, pues se crearon un poco más de 9,000 empleos. Es un hecho que en el 2024 se crearon un poco más de 10,500 empleos y es un hecho que en el 2023 se crearon casi 24,000 empleos. Pero también es una realidad que el empleo ha ido desacelerando a través del tiempo y yo creo que eso tiene que ver en parte con lo que mencionó el ponente anterior de que Puerto Rico posiblemente está ya operando a capacidad, ¿no? En términos de la capacidad que tenemos de mano de obra. Y pues es lo que es. Estamos hablando de una creación cada vez más lenta de empleo y eso pues tiene unas repercusiones. Es una realidad que la tasa de desempleo está a niveles históricamente bajos. O sea, yo recuerdo ver hace varios años atrás tasas de desempleo del 16%. Pero una tasa de desempleo de 5.5% no es nada para celebrar cuando nos adentramos en las estadísticas granulares y vemos que la tasa de desempleo para los jóvenes en la isla de 16 a 24 años está entre el 10 y 24% cuando queremos retener a estos muchachos para que aporten, ¿verdad? Y puedan continuar apoyando las iniciativas económicas del país. Es una realidad también que el porciento del empleo que se ha generado durante el último año se ha concentrado en empleo a tiempo parcial, mientras que el empleo a tiempo completo ha estado cayendo. ¿Qué quiere decir esto? Que las personas sí están siendo empleadas, pero no tienen seguridad de empleo y la calidad del empleo en términos de beneficios es menor, es más delicada la situación de ellos y por consiguiente tiene unas implicaciones para su movilidad, ¿verdad? Así que el mercado laboral, pues es lo que es, presenta una resiliencia, pero las estadísticas muestran que la situación sin duda alguna es más complicada de lo que muchos dicen. El sector comercial, pues es la misma historia. Si vemos la estadística de ventas al detalle ajustados a inflación, pues estamos hablando de un crecimiento muy, muy lento en las ventas al detalle. Pero si cogemos y abrimos la estadística de ventas al detalle, por establecimiento vemos tres cosas. Que el consumidor está moderando o cambiando su patrón de consumo, está consumiendo menos bienes discrecionales, más bienes asociados con necesidades para su diario vivir. Estamos viendo que los establecimientos que venden esos productos que son necesarios están experimentando crecimientos en ventas muy lentos. Y sí estamos viendo que hay unos crecimientos bastante sorprendentes en ciertos establecimientos que se especializan en productos de lujo. Y esto lo que quiere decir que el que tiene dinero y no es sensitivo al cambio en precio, en inflación, puede gastar en ese tipo de cosas. Pero la mayoría de los que no tienen ese poder adquisitivo se están viendo forzados a ajustar su patrón de consumo porque la inflación no les está dando la flexibilidad de poder consumir lo que quieren, y las estadísticas del gasto de consumo personal al cierre del año fiscal 2025 de la Junta de Planificación evidencia eso, tanto en bienes duraderos como bienes no duraderos, entiéndase alimentos, unas caídas muy impresionantes en consumo, que no es otra cosa que el consumidor está ajustando su patrón de consumo ante la presión que está experimentando en su poder adquisitivo. No es de sorprender que las ventas al detalle estén creciendo a ese ritmo y que las ventas de automóviles estén experimentando contracción, porque aparte de la inflación tenemos un incremento en tasas de intereses y un problema de asequibilidad en términos de las unidades de automóviles que se están vendiendo en el mercado, o sea, están muy caros. Por lo tanto, eso está también afectando el ritmo de crecimiento en la actividad comercial en los dealers de automóviles. Y tenemos que las quiebras comerciales están aumentando en un ambiente de presión inflacionaria que ejerce presión sobre los costos operacionales, en un ambiente en donde las tasas de interés permanecen altas. Obviamente van a haber muchos establecimientos experimentando reducciones en venta y viéndose forzados a cerrar las operaciones o a reestructurar ante la realidad financiera que están experimentando. El sector de la construcción, vamos a hablar un poquito más adelante de él, pero lo único que tengo que decir aquí, que si bien es cierto que las ventas de cemento han estado aumentando en meses recientes, no es menos cierto que las expectativas que teníamos de que iba a haber un boom en la actividad de la construcción por la inyección de los fondos federales de construcción no se ha materializado, al menos como muchos esperábamos. Y la realidad es que eso ha ocurrido por varias razones. Número uno, un desembolso lento de fondos federales, y número dos, el sector de la construcción hoy día no tiene la capacidad para poder absorber todos esos fondos, y vamos a ver más adelante por qué. El consumidor, sí, la inflación ha aumentado 1.4%, y el salario promedio de los trabajadores en el sector no agrícola ha aumentado más de lo que ha aumentado la inflación, lo que sugiere que el salario real ha mejorado, ¿no? Sin embargo, en los últimos meses lo que hemos visto es un estancamiento en el crecimiento del salario real, y esto es consistente con lo que surge de las estadísticas de la Junta de Planificación, en donde el ingreso personal disponible se estancó en el año fiscal 2025. Así que tenemos un consumidor con una presión en su presupuesto que ha tenido que incurrir en el crédito para poder financiar su consumo, y hoy está experimentando unas situación de fragilidad financiera moderada que posiblemente podría agravarse en los próximos meses si obviamente los patrones que estamos observando en el mercado laboral y en términos de precios no cambian. ¿Okay? Ya hablaron del índice de actividad económica. Aquí lo que hay que decirles es que la economía, según este índice, estaba ya en territorio negativo. Estábamos hablando de negativo 0.71% para el periodo de enero a agosto, cuando veníamos de un crecimiento de 1.42%, y que la inflación, sí, el ritmo de inflación, de crecimiento en la inflación, ha estado desacelerando. En julio del 2022 estábamos hablando de una inflación del 7%. Aquí, para el acumulado de enero a noviembre, ya estábamos hablando de 1.45, pero no nos llamemos engaño. ¿Por qué? Porque cuando hacemos el análisis a nivel granular, la inflación para bienes y servicios, muchos de primera necesidad y fundamentales para los consumidores, está duplicando, en algunos casos triplicando, lo que es la inflación promedio en Puerto Rico. 16% en huevos, para que tengan una idea. Yo pagué $11 por una docena de huevos los otros días. Ese es ese número que ustedes ven ahí. Y eso es lo que está pagando mucha gente allá afuera con un poder adquisitivo comprometido en estos momentos por el tema inflacionario. Así que el salario real en el agregado ha estado creciendo, correcto, pero el salario real no va a la par con esos crecimientos que se están dando en los precios en la economía, y esto es lo que tiene una situación de una vulnerabilidad financiera muy seria a los consumidores en la isla. En Puerto Rico, el gasto de consumo personal está más del 90%. Bueno, si vemos las estadísticas más recientes en los últimos 3 años, representa más del 98% del Producto Nacional Bruto de la isla, ¿verdad? ¿Por qué? Porque en Puerto Rico ha habido una inyección masiva de fondos federales no recurrentes que ha sido lo que en su inicio dio a ese crecimiento en el gasto de consumo personal, del crecimiento en el producto se tradujeron en un crecimiento del 1, del 2% durante los últimos años fiscales. Pero esos 15.000 millones de dólares que el consumidor recibió como estímulo fiscal, ya eso se disipó. Y ese gasto de consumo vino a estar sustituido en un contexto en donde el salario real se ha mantenido estancado por un crecimiento en el crédito otorgado por las instituciones financieras en Puerto Rico por el equivalente a 4.400 millones de dólares. ¿Okay? Así que, en ausencia de un crecimiento en el ingreso real, bajo presiones inflacionarias que no ceden, en un contexto en donde el crédito ha crecido como está creciendo, la realidad es que sí, el Producto Nacional Bruto en una economía en donde el crecimiento depende más del 95% de lo que se consuma en la isla, pues sí va a crecer, pero eso tiene unos riesgos muy importantes que vamos a ver más adelante. Y el sector de la construcción, como dije, pues sí, tenemos muchos miles de millones de dólares obligados, pero tenemos muchos miles de millones de dólares que no han sido desembolsados todavía. Y si ese desembolso lento en fondos federales se combina con el hecho de que en Puerto Rico no tenemos suficiente mano de obra diestra en el sector de la construcción, que los costos de los materiales de construcción continúan incrementando, ¿verdad? Que las presiones sobre los costos de los materiales de construcción continuará incrementando porque hay una expansión y una proliferación de inversión en centros de datos en Estados Unidos que está requiriendo esta materia prima. Y si a esto le añadimos que en Estados Unidos al 2026 se estima se necesitan 500,000 empleados en el sector de la construcción además de los 498,000 que se necesitaban el año anterior, estamos hablando que ese diferencial salarial es un incentivo para que estos trabajadores salgan de Puerto Rico y se vayan a ganar un salario más alto en los Estados Unidos, y eso está limitando básicamente las posibilidades de que nosotros podamos tener esos crecimientos que habíamos apostado iba a haber en algún momento en Puerto Rico con el flujo de estos fondos federales. Para complicar la cosa, sí hay desarrolladores en Puerto Rico, pero no tienen ni la capacidad financiera ni el flujo de efectivo para asumir estos proyectos grandes de reconstrucción. Así que estamos ante un entorno en donde sí hay fondos, pero el timeline del desembolso de estos fondos se ha atrasado, y lo más posible debamos pensar que todos esos proyectos que estaban en el pipeline, su efecto se traduzca en años fiscales subsiguientes, si es que tenemos suerte, ¿no? Y no se reducen algunos de estos fondos federales. No creo que ese sea el caso, no es lo que nosotros estamos contemplando en estudios técnicos. Así que en términos de los riesgos relevantes, estamos hablando de que hay 44,000 millones de dólares de fondos de reconstrucción pendientes de desembolsarse por las limitaciones en capacidad que les mencioné anteriormente. No es razonable pensar que vamos a estar gastando hasta el 2035 4,400 millones de dólares. Razonable es pensar que con toda probabilidad a las limitaciones de capacidad que tenemos, lo que se pueda básicamente absorber en la economía estaría entre unos 2.500 a unos 3.000 millones de dólares anuales, ¿no? El problema es que si el costo de los materiales de construcción continúa aumentando, esos 2.500, 3.000 millones de dólares se van a hacer agua. Y si podíamos financiar antes 15 proyectos, ahora con toda probabilidad vamos a poder financiar la mitad de estos proyectos, y el impacto multiplicador en la economía, pues es razonable esperar que sea más bajo del esperado inicialmente. El consumidor, ya les dije que tiene una presión financiera que viene por el lado de la inflación, viene por el lado de que el salario real no está creciendo, viene por el lado de que las tasas de intereses permanecen altas y de que se ha apalancado. Esta gráfica que ustedes ven en la parte superior les muestra la razón deuda del consumidor como % del ingreso personal disponible, y verán que en el 2015 tenían de cada dólar de ingreso personal disponible, 63 centavos eran deuda. Eso bajó a 39 centavos, casi 40 centavos en el año fiscal 2022, y volvió a subir a 44 centavos en el 2025. Y esto es preocupante porque el apalancamiento del consumidor está aumentando en un contexto en donde hay incertidumbre con relación al mercado laboral, a las posibilidades de empleo, y aún más preocupante porque esta estadística que ustedes ven aquí está subestimada. Y les voy a decir por qué. Porque ahí no estamos tomando en consideración la deuda de tarjetas de crédito emitida por bancos e instituciones financieras en los Estados Unidos. ¿Qué quiere decir esto? Que ese ratio que ustedes ven ahí de 44,2% fácilmente podría estar en el 45-47% si esa información estuviera disponible. Así que un consumidor apalancado donde su patrimonio neto está reduciéndose y en donde no tiene margen para ahorrar, pues obviamente estamos hablando que la capacidad de acumulación también de capital en la economía de Puerto Rico realmente con tasas de ahorro negativas está limitada. De ahí la dependencia de los fondos federales no recurrentes para poder financiar esto. Ahora bien, si vemos las métricas de calidad de activos de los bancos, ¿qué es lo que nos está diciendo? La delincuencia en las tarjetas de crédito, en los portfolios de las tarjetas de crédito, de consumo, de automóviles, está aumentando secuencialmente. Ya supera el cuarto trimestre del 2019 y nos dirán, claro, pero está por debajo del histórico. Claro que está por debajo del histórico, pero eso es lo que a mí no me importa. A mí lo que me interesa es cómo va evolucionando trimestralmente. Y trimestralmente ya se ve un deterioro que se agrava con una estadística que no está ahí, pero que nosotros vemos con mucha regularidad. El porciento de personas que son tenedores de tarjetas de crédito que están pagando el mínimo está aumentando relativo a los que pagaban la totalidad a fin de mes. ¿Qué quiere decir esto? El consumidor tiene un serio problema de flujo de efectivo y ya no necesariamente está pagando la tarjeta de crédito como antes. Está cambiando su patrón de consumo y su patrón de pago. Y esto tiene unas implicaciones importantes porque este deterioro en los indicadores de calidad de activo de la banca lo que implica es que la banca, para protegerse del riesgo de crédito, posiblemente vaya a implementar unas políticas de originación de préstamos un poco más restrictivas, lo que tendrá unas implicaciones adversas sobre el crecimiento en el consumo y en la inversión. Así que estamos ya terminando. En términos de los fondos federales, es un riesgo que a nosotros en estudios técnicos nos preocupa muchísimo. Porque en el año fiscal 2025, pues hubo una transferencia de 38.800 millones de dólares. Eso fue un incremento de 21.650 millones con relación al 2016 y el 43% de estos fondos son discrecionales. Entiéndase que si el gobierno federal decide hacer ajustes en su gasto para atender su situación fiscal, que todos sabemos es muy delicada, y así nos los está indicando ya el mercado de bonos, podrían haber reducciones en fondos federales que impacten al consumidor de manera material. ¿Ok? Así que lo mismo o la misma historia va con el tema del gobierno de Puerto Rico. Nos dimos a la tarea de ver cuál es el presupuesto certificado para el año fiscal 2026 e identificar cuáles serían algunas agencias con mayor riesgo operacional o disrupción o disloques en sus operaciones a raíz de la posibilidad de que haya una reducción en gastos federales. Pues miren, ni lo tengo que decir. Departamento de la Vivienda, Departamento de Salud, Salud, dependen de más de un 47% de su presupuesto de fondos federales. Así que esto es muy preocupante, ¿verdad? Entonces, ¿qué quiere decirle esto? De cara a las proyecciones de estudios técnicos, que nosotros usualmente somos muy conservadores y nuestras proyecciones están obviamente predicadas bajo la premisa de que tenemos que contemplar los riesgos y las proyecciones son solamente una herramienta de planificación, ¿verdad? Pues lo que nos está diciendo esto es, y esta es nuestra narrativa, que sí, los fondos de reconstrucción continuarán siendo la palanca principal del crecimiento en la actividad económica en el corto mediano plazo. Por supuesto, tendrá un impacto importante, después de todo representa el 82% del Producto Nacional Bruto. Pero si no se agiliza el proceso de desembolso de estos fondos, pues obviamente el impacto, su efecto en el crecimiento de la economía no se va a sentir como quisiéramos, y lo vamos a ver más adelante. Hay cosas interesantes que están ocurriendo, o sea, el tema del reshoring es importante, ¿verdad? Esto le está dando un apoyo a la manufactura. Estamos viendo la introducción de líneas de producción en la isla y esto implica inversión, no necesariamente inversión en edificios, pero inversión. Estamos viendo que el sector aeroespacial continúa fortalecido, eso es positivo. Estamos viendo una expansión en el ecosistema de pequeñas y medianas empresas, aunque la realidad es que el ritmo de creación de nuevos negocios en Puerto Rico ha caído considerablemente en los últimos meses, ¿no? Últimos años. Y estamos viendo también un mercado laboral que, como dije anteriormente y dijo el ponente anterior, pues muestra fortaleza en el sector de servicio, en el sector de turismo, pero también es preocupante porque la actividad de turismo es dependiente en gran medida de lo que ocurra con el mercado laboral en Estados Unidos, y las estadísticas hoy no son muy alentadoras, ¿no?, con relación a lo que está ocurriendo en ese mercado laboral. Y aunque el balance sheet de los consumidores en los Estados Unidos pueda estar reflejando algo de estabilidad, eso no quita el hecho de que vayan a hacer ajustes en su gasto discrecional y que eso impacte el número de visitantes que llegue a la isla. Tenemos que la inflación y las tasas de interés continuarán afectando el ingreso de los individuos, la posición financiera de los individuos y las empresas. Y tenemos también que el Medicaid cliff, y ese es un riesgo que nos estamos tomando en serio en estudios técnicos, pues podría tener un impacto muy importante a partir del 2028. No estamos contemplando la salida total de esos fondos, pero sí estamos contemplando la posibilidad de que pueda haber una renegociación, pero con unos porcientos más bajos de asignaciones, ¿no? Al menos en nuestro escenario base. Los fondos federales son una fuente importante para financiar el consumo, pero como les dije, tenemos una tasa de ahorro negativa y no podemos depender de estos fondos federales. Así que, ¿qué nos deja esto? Buscar alternativas que permitan la inyección externos a la isla. En ese sentido, a mí me parece que medidas como las que se han estado discutiendo en la Asamblea Legislativa, como el proyecto de igualdad contributiva, podría apoyar esta iniciativa de atracción de capital del exterior acá. O sea, estamos hablando de que Hacienda y OPAL estimaron el impacto en 100 millones, pero los beneficios superan 6 veces ese costo fiscal. Estamos hablando de casi 3.000 millones de dólares acumulados en 5 años, ¿verdad? Así que esa inyección de fondos a la isla, sin duda alguna, podría promover no tan solo la inversión, el consumo, y en un sistema financiero que está protegiendo y cuidando su liquidez, porque hay issues de liquidez allá afuera, esto abona a fortalecer la liquidez del sistema. Así que yo quiero terminar básicamente con la perspectiva económica, y la perspectiva económica de nosotros es año fiscal 2025, 26 y 27, un promedio de contracción en la actividad económica de negativo 0.9%, y a partir del 2028, sin duda alguna, con las premisas que nosotros estamos utilizando, que incluyen reducción en el crecimiento del consumo, impactos inflacionarios, estamos tomando en consideración reducción de 50% en la asignación no recurrente que se dio al tema de Medicaid, pues la economía estaría cayendo a un negativo 2% en el 2021. Por supuesto que pueden ocurrir muchas cosas que cambien esto, definitivamente, pero los riesgos que nosotros estamos viendo sopesan estas cosas que podrían estar ocurriendo, y esto nos lleva a un último planteamiento. Estos números que ustedes ven aquí es el reflejo de una economía en donde nosotros hemos estado implementando una política que posiblemente hay que repensar. Y esto lo que me dice a mí es que hay que reestructurar todo el sistema económico de Puerto Rico. De lo contrario, todos los años vamos a estar con el título de la presentación del ponente anterior que decía New Year, Same Worries. Y eso no lo queremos, ¿verdad? Gracias.
Gracias, director. I think we have a lot of questions for you, is what I hear. So, vamos a empezar con Senate Majority Leader.
Buena. Tengo una pregunta. Voy a ir directamente cuando hablas de que la mayoría de empleo que tienes, que vemos, es de tiempo parcial.
La mayoría del empleo que se ha creado durante el último año es correcto, es a tiempo parcial.
En medio de los estudios, ustedes dicen, bueno, este es el problema, ¿qué debiésemos hacer para cambiarlo? ¿Ustedes también hacen sus estudios?
Por supuesto que los hacemos.
Y cuando ustedes ven que la mayoría de empleo fue a tiempo parcial, ¿qué alternativas, si alguna, ustedes vieron para que eso cambiase?
Pues mira, a mí no me cabe la menor duda de que la razón por la cual el empleo es a tiempo parcial es porque hay una incertidumbre allá afuera a nivel del sector empresarial de qué es lo que va a ocurrir con la economía de Puerto Rico y qué es lo que va a ocurrir con la inflación y qué va a ocurrir con unos costos que se nos están introduciendo a nosotros como empresarios. Costo de energía eléctrica, por ejemplo, es uno de ellos que está ahorcando a muchos establecimientos, ¿verdad? Es que está ejerciendo una presión, sin duda alguna, sobre las estructuras operacionales. Pues, si usted me pregunta a mí qué cosas deberían hacerse, pues no me cabe la menor duda que evitar introducir medidas que ahorquen económicamente a los empresarios, a los pequeños y medianas empresas, que son las que están llevando la carga básicamente de esto.
Y otra de las cosas que estableció es que hay una falta de mano de obra. Eso está en Puerto Rico y así está en los estados. Eso también
Sí.
Además de lo que usted dice, de las leyes que puedan venir y presionar al pueblo, yo entiendo que, espero que con este simposio y la Junta nos esté escuchando, están aquí, nos dé la oportunidad a nosotros de nosotros poder legislar, porque nosotros tenemos un talento que quiere trabajar. Están en los residenciales públicos, están en las comunidades que reciben ayuda. Pero ¿cuál es el efecto? Esta persona dice, yo voy a trabajar y tengo negativo renta. Y a los 3 meses le suben a $800. Pues ellos tratan de trabajar a tiempo parcial. Si nosotros legisláramos y nos permitiesen a nosotros buscar la forma de hacer un plan para ver una transición, yo le garantizo que vamos a conseguir mano de obra y vamos a tener empleos que sean de jornada completa. Es que ahora mismo nosotros tenemos miles de ciudadanos que viven en Puerto Rico que están viviendo, reciben vivienda del gobierno, que si comienzan a trabajar, se las quitan. No hay una transición. Pues yo, debido a esto que acabo de escuchar, voy a crear legislación para que la Junta de Control Fiscal me ayude a que haya una transición, para que vayan a pelear con nosotros al Congreso, para que de alguna forma pueda haber una transición, porque necesitamos mano de obra, las necesitamos. Sí. Muchas de ese dinero que no se puede desembolsar es porque cuando van a la subasta están desiertas, no tengo gente. Pues yo creo que nosotros sí tenemos un talento de gente, lo que sucede es que de alguna forma tenemos que buscar motivarlo, primero para poder usar ese dinero, y segundo para decirle, oye, tú no vas a comenzar a trabajar y al otro día te voy a subir la renta y lo que ganas no te da para vivir, porque no le va a dar para pagar el apartamento, ni le va a dar para la comida. Yo creo que sí, en Puerto Rico nosotros podemos hacer más cosas, pero necesitamos ayuda. Sí. Necesitamos ayuda porque, como usted lo dice, no tenemos empleados. A veces usted ve desierto, a veces usted ve por ahí en Puerto Rico, a diferencia, yo estaba en Sudamérica y no hay letreros que necesitan gente. Aquí tú pasas por cualquier parte porque la gente tiene el problema del choque. Y yo creo que tenemos que crear legislación con ayuda de la Junta de Supervisión Fiscal y el Congreso para nosotros poder poner a trabajar a estas personas en una transición que podría ser 36 meses. Es que lo que duran son 3 meses y 4 meses y se van y vuelven y nunca hay una estabilidad. Yo creo que podemos hacer eso y yo voy a comenzar a hacerlo y espero que el señor Mojica me ayude en eso. Eso es todo.
Muy bien.
Sí, señora, me tengo una pregunta. Aquí hay 2 proyectos, uno de la Cámara, el proyecto de la Cámara 501, el proyecto del Senado 488, que propone equiparar a todos los residentes de Puerto Rico con la Ley 60, extendiéndole el 4%, la tasa del 4%, a las ganancias de capital. Quisiera su opinión sobre eso.
Bueno, me parece que lo mencioné anteriormente, ¿no? En una economía en donde la tasa de ahorro es negativa, o sea, sin ahorro no hay inversión, ¿verdad? En una economía en donde dependemos de fondos federales y de que ocurran eventos como María o como el COVID para que entren 15.000 millones de dólares y de momento nos dé un respiro y podamos crecer, pues eso plantea un problema como país, ¿verdad? Y me parece que atraer capital del exterior, pues es algo positivo. Y me parece que si hay unos contribuyentes que tienen unas ganancias de capital que están tributando al 15, al 24%, y de momento se modifica, se enmienda la ley para que tributen al 4%, pues eso podría ser un incentivo para que estas personas que tienen estos dineros, este capital fuera, lo traigan aquí y que eso sirva como una fuente de ingresos para financiar el consumo y la inversión. Y lo digo con la seguridad de que allá afuera, cuando nosotros analizamos las estadísticas del sistema financiero, hay varios problemas. Número 1, la liquidez es un issue. Número 2, no hay diversificación a nivel del sistema financiero para proveer financiamiento, ¿verdad? Y número 3, el apetito para proveer financiamiento a pequeñas y medianas empresas es poco. En aquellos sectores o segmentos de las pymes en donde realmente nosotros deberíamos estar financiando. Así que cuando usted me pregunta a mí qué pienso, pues yo pienso que los estimados apuntan, y no son los estimados nuestros, los estimados de Hacienda y OPAL apuntan a que el costo son unos 100 millones de dólares, pero podría resultar en un beneficio que en el escenario menos optimista duplique ese costo, en el escenario base, que es el más realista, dentro de las premisas, pues implique 3.000 millones de dólares acumulados en 5 años. Estamos hablando de que sea 6 veces ese costo. Así que definitivamente podría tener unas repercusiones muy importantes en una economía en donde necesitamos la liquidez para financiar esa actividad económica.
Gracias, director. La pregunta que, economista, escuché que usted mencionó específico, estamos aquí discutiendo, tengo la ventaja de tener el componente fiscal y a los compañeros locales, que habrá un proyecto que está ante la atención de la Asamblea Legislativa y quería que estar claro cuál es el proyecto, porque tenemos el 505 de la Cámara, 501, que tiene que ver con la Ley 60. Uno es la extensión a 20 años, el otro es el 4% para todos, y está también el proyecto con que es una sola vez que aprobamos, que es la resolución conjunta 278, que tiene que ver con la reforma contributiva. Si era el de Ley 60 específico, ese es que usted se refería de alivio o igualdad.
Sí, estoy refiriéndome al del 4% aplicable a todos.
Perfecto.
Tanto a los residentes
claro.
aquí como no residentes.
Y la segunda, en cuanto a los números, que es importante comparar, el informe Lopal lo estima entre 126 a 132.
Sí,
para
correcto.
estar claro con esa parte de los números. Y esta tengo dos que las voy a dejar para récord para no ser repetitivo con los demás economistas. En cuanto al tema de fondos federales, que sabemos que viene COVID Money, que está en phase out, pero tenemos el tema de la reconstrucción en Puerto Rico. ¿Cómo ustedes miden ese número? ¿Se lo están midiendo a 5 años, 10 años? Porque si uno entra a la página de los datos propios del gobierno, tenemos 41 billones asignados, 38 obligados, estoy redondeando, y 12 billones desembolsados. ¿Cómo estamos viendo ese phase out? Si es a 2 años, 5 años, 10 años, porque ese dinero no se va a gastar en un año. Y el último, que va para todos también, no he escuchado que ninguno ha mencionado el tema de la inversión del tema militar. Si busca el presupuesto del Congreso, había una inversión real por el tema de Venezuela, las operaciones en el Caribe, Fort Buchanan, el caso de Aguadilla, Ponce. Esa es la que está en el propio presupuesto del gobierno federal. Y también hay una actividad económica que se está dando en estos días. Si eso entiendo que va a ser positivo para la economía, no he escuchado que ninguno lo ha mencionado, si ustedes han medido eso también. Y para estar claro otra vez, porque lo vamos a trabajar, quiero escuchar bien el tema de los proyectos que están pendientes en la Cámara y en el Senado.
Bueno,
¿y alguna recomendación? He escuchado muchas recetas, pero no he escuchado, ¿verdad?
Me has hecho muchas preguntas y yo tengo...
Ellos me conocen.
Sí, ya veo, pero yo tengo un poco de ADD, así que voy a tratar de contestarla.
Te lo voy a enseñar por escrito también.
Con relación a ¿Qué medida me estaba refiriendo? Me estaba refiriendo, ya le contesté, al 4%.
4, ok.
Así que quede en récord eso. Con relación a la última, que es la que me acuerdo de los gastos del gobierno, digo, de la milicia en Puerto Rico, bueno, pues definitivamente algún impacto positivo tendrá, ¿no? Se está generando una actividad de construcción en la medida en que se mejoran las facilidades que se están utilizando y sin duda alguna también en esos municipios en donde se está concentrando esa actividad, se está generando una actividad adicional en el sector, en los sectores comerciales. Yo estuve los otros días en Ponce, en un restaurante que me gusta mucho, y estaba lleno de militares. Así que eso sí tiene un efecto positivo. Lo que no creo es que vaya a ser un game changer en términos de las perspectivas económicas que nosotros estamos teniendo, porque obviamente se necesita más, ¿verdad? Con relación a los fondos federales de reconstrucción, creo que fue la otra pregunta, nosotros estamos utilizando la información de Col 3. La información de Col 3 lo que está diciendo es que si nosotros excluimos los fondos COVID, lo que queda sin desembolsar son 44,000 millones de dólares. Y esos 44,000 millones de dólares, nosotros en nuestra proyección estamos asumiendo básicamente que se estaría desembolsando e invirtiendo entre unos 2.500, 3.000 millones de dólares, y el impacto que esto vaya a tener en la economía, por supuesto, va a depender de qué pase con los materiales de construcción, de qué pase con la disponibilidad de mano de obra en la economía, porque en la medida en que esas barreras no cambien, podremos tener los 4.400 millones por año y no se van a poder invertir por las limitaciones que tenemos a nivel del sector de la construcción. En términos de recomendaciones, pues ya le dije, no podemos continuar dependiendo de que ocurra un huracán María o que ocurra un chikungunya o un COVID para que el gobierno federal nos dé mucho dinero y reactivar el consumo. Yo creo que aquí es fundamental que se desarrolle un plan de desarrollo económico bien articulado que incluya temas como capital humano. ¿Qué vamos a hacer nosotros? Una economía en donde más del 30% de las personas hábiles para trabajar lo que tienen es bachillerato o menos, en un mercado laboral en donde estamos apostando a farmacéutica, a medical device, a IT, que requieren unos niveles de destrezas más especializados por un lado, y en donde la automatización está sustituyendo mano de obra. ¿Qué vamos a hacer en una economía en donde la población se está envejeciendo, vive más, y el gobierno va a tener que obviamente que dar más fondos para atender las necesidades de estas personas, porque la fuerza trabajadora joven no está ahí o se está yendo porque los trabajos que hay no son de calidad, ¿verdad? Todo eso que va desde a plantearnos el modelo institucional hasta atender temas de capital humano, hasta atender temas de ejecución y asegurarnos de que los planes de desarrollo económico, hay muchos por ahí, yo llevo 20 años en esta y hay muchos por ahí, se ejecuten y se implementen, pues eso es lo que es fundamental. ¿Qué hay que hacer? Implementarlos, los planes que hay ahí, que todos coinciden en lo mismo, pero un problema de ejecución, de implementación más que nada.
Sí, es verdad.
Gracias.
Sí, ¿no? Lo único al final, que cada vez que hagan referencia a un proyecto que está discutiendo, si nos pueden dar, le vamos a preguntar porque estamos aquí para atenderlo. Si hacen algún proyecto referencia a lo que está pendiente en Cámara y Senado, pues nos pueden preguntar para verificarlo, si nosotros podemos tomar las notas.
No tengo
de manera
que...
correcta. Sí. No, un comentario.
Okay.
Sí.
Permiso, Mujica, Adame, gracias por estar aquí. Estoy escuchando, ¿verdad? Porque estuve hace poco en una conferencia con el Col 3 y bien nos enseñaban los números que el presidente de la Comisión de Hacienda ha traído a la discusión de los fondos federales. Y todos sabemos que tenemos X cantidad de fondos asignada, obligada y desembolsada. Cuando dicen obligada, no quiere decir que se está ejecutando, es que está esperando por el proceso ante cualquier agencia que tiene injerencia para el desembolso de los mismos. Pero sé que usted ha dicho que hay planes de desarrollo y usted dice que hay problemas de ejecución. cuando la discusión estábamos en ese momento, decían, es que yo no puedo poner tanto dinero a correr porque el filtro para que corra, la ejecución está un poco estrecho, ¿verdad? Y yo sé que usted quizás no tiene la solución, pero yo decía, pues vamos a reenfocar, en vez de en el filtro, cómo amplío esa opción para que ese dinero siga corriendo y no se quede meramente como obligado, que sea desembolsado y ejecutado, porque nos ayuda a la infraestructura del país, pero nos ayuda a lo que usted dice, a generar empleo, ingresos. Las ciudades siguen creciendo porque pueden recibir otros ingresos los municipios y pueden aportar en diferentes causas del país. No sé si, cuando usted dice ejecución, si pinpoint sabe dónde es que está la ejecución y nos puede dar esa sugerencia.
No, creo que ha habido una confusión. La pregunta era qué recomendaciones da, no me dé el problema. Y tengo que plantearle el problema, porque la realidad es que estamos liados, ¿no? Pero cuando me refería a eso, básicamente lo que estaba diciendo es, yo llegué aquí a Puerto Rico en el 2000, yo nací en Puerto Rico, como cuestión de hecho, y luego de estudiar, regresé y llevo 26 años trabajando. En 26 años, si yo no me equivoco, se han hecho más de 5 planes de desarrollo económico, y si ustedes los leen, todos coinciden en las recetas. Y la pregunta es, ¿por qué estamos aquí hoy discutiendo el tema fiscal? ¿Y por qué estamos discutiendo o me están haciendo contestarle esa pregunta, verdad? Y denos la receta. Y la pregunta es, porque aún con 5 o 6 estudios que coinciden en un 98%, hemos tenido un problema de ejecución. Eso es todo. Ahora, con relación a lo que usted está planteando de los fondos federales, es muy sencillo. Si esos fondos federales no se desembolsan porque hay unas limitaciones o unos cortapisas en el proceso, pues el impacto de esos 44 mil millones de dólares no lo sentiremos en el 2026, en el 2027, a lo mejor lo sentiremos en el 2030, cuando se desembolsen o cuando se busque la manera de poder canalizarse a otros proyectos que cumplan el mismo objetivo. ¿Se sentirá algo? Sí, pero a mí lo que me parece es que la discusión nos está llevando a pensar en qué tenemos que hacer para que la economía crezca durante los próximos 5 años. Y yo lo que estoy diciendo es que tenemos que plantearnos qué tenemos que hacer para que la economía pueda crecer durante los próximos 5 años, pero ese crecimiento pueda ser sostenible a mediano y largo plazo. Claro. Y eso requiere ejecución de los planes de desarrollo económico, que muchos coinciden en un 99%.
Muchas gracias.
Any more questions from anyone? And just, the board will review all of the legislation that's been discussed here. We'll review many more pieces of legislation, I'm sure, that haven't been discussed here. And the issue really becomes which things within the economic forecasts and within the revenues that we have, which of them we can actually afford to pay for. And if they're recurring, which ones we can afford to pay for over the next 5 years. And that's the budget exercise, and that's why we're here. So, and we encourage all of the legislators to submit their legislation, we'll review, respond, and then the important part is actually do this as part of the budget process. So then we can see it all together, not individual pieces, and then we just add them up, and then we see what we can afford. So I look forward to working with you on whatever legislation you want to advance. I also want to acknowledge Director Ekrian Martinez, Director of the Puerto Rico Legislative Assembly Budget Office, who did not acknowledge earlier. Welcome and thank you. I know our teams work together a lot. The next presentation, again, thank you, Adame. Thank you for your presentation and the discussion. I'm sure we'll be talking in the future. The next presentation is from Professor Jose Caraballo Cueto. He's the director of the Center for Development Studies at the University of Puerto Rico. The floor is yours.
Thank you. I don't know, maybe I'm going to make my presentation in Spanglish so that everyone understands what I'm going to say. First of all, I would like to make a disclaimer. My only job is to work for the University of Puerto Rico. So I'm going to start with 3 points about the economy of Puerto Rico, and then with 4 options to jumpstart the economic growth in Puerto Rico. The first thing I would like to say is going back to Macroeconomics 101, which is actually a class that I'm going to teach today. We're going to talk, I would like to talk about fiscal multiplier. If we take an accounting perspective to correct the fiscal crisis of Puerto Rico, what we have to do is cut the government expenditures, and that's about it. But guess what? The fiscal multiplier is greater than 1. So it means that if we cut the government budget by $100, the effect on the economy is going to be larger than $100. So at the end, the government revenues are going to decrease, and then you start a vicious cycle. So how do you get out of that vicious cycle? You need economic growth. So I think that is an important thing of this meeting, to how we are going to address economic growth. In other words, without economic growth, we are not going to see the light at the end of the tunnel. The second point I would like to make is that the forecast, we pay a lot of attention to forecasts. And I know people, there are some friends here in the media, they love that as well. But few people pay attention to the accuracy of those forecasts. So the consultants of the Fiscal Control Board predict that the fiscal year 2025 that just ended, the economy is going to decrease by 0.8%. The Puerto Rico Planning Board forecasts a positive 1.2%. It appears that they were referring to 2 different economies. One was saying it's going to decline, the other is going to grow. I said last year, actually in this symposium, that the economy is going to be around 0%. It's going to be more or less stationary. And at the end of the day, what happened is that the economy grew by 0.4%. So we should pay more attention, because I think many of these forecasts have missed the shot several times. And that have led many of our policymakers to make wrong decisions. One of the things, the problem with the forecasts that have been made is that they still consider that the U.S. economy has a huge effect, especially the business cycle of the U.S. have a huge effect on Puerto Rico, and that's no longer the case. Actually, I made a grander causality test between the index of economic activity. I couldn't reject. In other words, there is a stronger causality between those indices. Here you can observe that. During the period of Section 936, you see a high correlation between the index of economic activity in the U.S. and in Puerto Rico. But after 2006, structural change there, so you can no longer assume that the business cycle in the U.S. is going to impact at the same manner the economy of Puerto Rico. Actually, for many years after 2006, the economy of the United States has been growing, while the Puerto Rican economy has been going down. The economy of Puerto Rico lately have been dependent on 2 factors for the economic growth. First, U.S. subsidies. Here I put it as a share of the gross national product, o lo que aquí le llaman el Producto Bruto. Y van a ver ahí cómo después del huracán María aumentó significativamente, no solamente por los fondos de reconstrucción, sino por los fondos de la pandemia. Y yo creo que eso es un consenso que hay entre todos los economistas, que esa inyección inusual de fondos federales ha causado este crecimiento económico momentáneo que estamos observando. Y el otro factor es el turismo, que también ha aumentado en los últimos años. Los factores, pues eso se necesita más investigación. Yo sé que nos encanta lanzar hipótesis, pero pues a mí me gustan un poco más los estudios más rigurosos. Lo que sí vemos ahí es que ha aumentado el turismo. Hemos visto estabilización en la población. Antes del huracán María era barranco abajo que iba la población total en Puerto Rico. La emigración también se ha reducido significativamente. After Hurricane Maria, we see more stabilization in out-migration. And actually, for a few years, we have observed net immigration. That is something new for us for several decades. Employment, total employment has been growing in these few years. You can see that there in the graph, as well as self-employment. We are not sure why self-employment has been growing so much. Probably is related to the tax reform of 2017. But again, we need robust research more than anecdotes and opinions. The second point I would like to make today, the third one, because the second one was the lack of accuracy in forecasting. The third one is that, well, the economy is growing. What is happening with tax revenues? Consumers, workers in Puerto Rico are paying more taxes at the individual level. Individual income taxes have been growing, as well as sales tax. The tax bracket that has been going down is corporate taxes, especially, as many of you know, se sustituyó aquí el recaudo de la ley 154 del 2010, el famoso 4% a las corporaciones foráneas, como le llaman aquí a las corporaciones extranjeras, que exactamente es un sinónimo, pero bueno. El punto es que se trató de sustituir esa legislación y no está rindiendo los mismos recaudos. Así que no es que estemos pagando menos impuestos, estamos pagando más. De hecho, si sumamos los aranceles, que son 285 millones, que lo que hace el gobierno federal es que descuenta sus operaciones del negociado de aduanas a nivel local, el resto se lo envía a Hacienda, y pueden buscar ahí en el internet, Puerto Rico Trust Fund, 280 millions for tariff revenues for the Puerto Rican for the Treasury of Puerto Rico. And the other new tax that we're paying is internet sales tax. Before 2017, many people bought things in the internet to avoid paying taxes in Puerto Rico. A lot of things they used to buy through the internet. Lately, almost everything, even if you want to use Netflix, you're going to pay taxes. So that's a new tax revenue for the general fund. So if you add those two sources, it's almost 450 million additional dollars that are receiving the Treasury. But what is happening with tax revenue? Well, the corporations are paying less. And this is something that has to be fixed, because I think that a tax relief for individual is long overdue. Yo creo que un alivio contributivo a los consumidores, eso se debe haber hecho hace mucho tiempo, porque se está pagando mucho más impuestos y impuestos regresivos, como es el impuesto al consumo. La inflación, pues el Departamento del Trabajo dice en ello que aquí la inflación está por debajo de la que está en Estados Unidos. Yo no estoy seguro si la están midiendo bien, sobre todo shrinkflation o redunflación en español. Eso es que usted va a comprar la habichuela en los mismos 99 centavos, pero tiene menos onza. Así que si usted va allí y lo que vas a medir, bueno, la habichuela ¿cuánto está? 99 centavos, que 99 centavos. Usted dice, aquí no hay inflación. Es que te la están pasando a través de lo que se llama la redunflación. Eso, among other things, they are measuring inflation. They're not using computers. They have a lot of methodological problems. And again, we are paying a lot of attention to forecasts, but what about the actual numbers? Are we measuring those numbers correctly, or we are just doing guesstimates to measure the economy? So in terms of alternative, first, we have to stop searching for a silver bullet. I know that we all know about Operation Bootstrap. Todos sabemos de operaciones manos a la obra y que la industrialización modernizó la economía de Puerto Rico y gracias al sector manufacturero, y eso está bueno para los libros de historia. Lo que hemos encontrado Jan y Nguyen y yo en un estudio que publicamos arbitrado en la revista Review of Development Economics es que en el largo plazo la inmensa mayoría de las economías que mejor crecen son las que están diversificadas, no las que dependen de un solo sector. Esas economías que depend on just one sector, at the end, in the long term, they were not as successful as those economies that were diversified. So we need to look for broad reform. We need to provide incentive, not tax incentive for all sectors. And we need to make sure that all sectors grew almost in a similar rate. Secondly, we need to do a large reform to tax incentive. We hear, and I would like to quote Albert Einstein. He said that the definition of a crazy person is the one that expects different results by doing the same thing. And we are doing tax incentive here in Puerto Rico unconditionally. So basically we say, I'm going to give you the tax incentive for nothing. You know, I'm just going to have faith that you're going to create employment, that you're going to invest, or better. Yo voy a basarme en lo que tú me vas a prometer, empleos prometidos. Eso es lo que publica el gobierno, no empleos comprometidos, son prometidos. ¿Qué hizo el gobierno federal bajo el Payroll Protection Program? Le dijo, tú vas a mantener esta nómina y yo te voy a dar este préstamo condonable. Si tú no mantienes esa nómina, cuando tú me envíes las planillas trimestrales, tú me vas a tener que devolver ese préstamo que te hice y no va a haber condonación. Aquí es, tú me prometiste 200 empleos, ok, aquí tienes tus créditos contributivos. Algunos se han embolsillado los créditos contributivos, no han hecho nada. Y eso es un boquete que tenemos aquí en términos de impuestos, y en la medida que estamos dando más impuestos a tutiplén, incluyendo el 4% a los inversionistas de Puerto Rico que ya están invirtiendo, que no están esperando este incentivo para salir a invertir, pues lo que estamos es cargando a la base contributiva más y más y más. Y esa base contributiva son los asalariados, la clase media, así que tenemos que tener mucho cuidado con estar proveyendo incentivos en base a anécdotas y no en base a realmente si esto va a incentivar. Si esto lo que va a hacer es un incentivo redundante, que pues a mí si me da un incentivo por ser profesor, me dice, mira, no tienes que pagar impuestos por ser profesor, pues yo lo cojo porque a nadie le amarga un dulce. Pero eso no me está moviendo a ningún tipo de acción. Yo iba a tomar el mismo curso de acción con o sin ese incentivo. Así que yo creo que necesitamos una reforma más abarcadora en esos incentivos para que realmente le podamos sacar el jugo. Y el ROI no mide eso, si le estamos sacando el jugo o no a los incentivos contributivos. If we go to the neoclassical growth model, there are a couple of factors there. First, interest rate. Second, population growth. Third, physical capital. Fourth, human capital and research and development. Among those factors, the only one that we can control in Puerto Rico is human capital. We cannot control interest rate. We cannot control population growth here. I hope that Puerto Rico become later or sooner than later a refugee zone so that we can attract more immigrants here in Puerto Rico, but that is not going to happen probably in the next couple of years. But the factor that we can control is human capital. But at the same time, the Fiscal Control Board cut the head to the University of Puerto Rico, the only university here that is doing research, and the only R2 university that we have in Puerto Rico. And that is going to be causing problems in the long term for Puerto Rico. So investing in higher education is not an expenditure. Investing in advertising, that is not investment. That is actually an expenditure. Third, we need a fiscal rule. What the Constitution of Puerto Rico is saying, que el presupuesto tiene que estar balanceado, eso es una regla fiscal procíclica y lo que hace es profundizar el ciclo económico. Si la economía está creciendo, los recaudos van a crecer, y si el presupuesto tiene que estar cuadrado, el gobierno va a gastar más, y lo que va a hacer es aumentar ese ciclo económico, y lo mismo va a pasar cuando la economía caiga. Caen los recaudos del gobierno, el gobierno va a gastar menos, y lo que va a profundizar ese ciclo económico. Así que lo que dice la Constitución está mal. Necesitamos una regla fiscal contracíclica. Cuando la economía crece, el gobierno tiene que ahorrar en esas vacas gordas para cuando vengan las vacas flacas, pues tenga un amortiguador y no tenga que incurrir en deuda. Y hay ya varias investigaciones publicadas, arbitradas en revistas. Yo sé que aquí en Puerto Rico no nos acostumbramos a hablar de journals y de peer-reviewed research, but many publications have found that economies that have been in debt crisis, thanks to a fiscal rule, they gain credibility in capital markets, and that's something that we need to pay more attention, how to amend the Constitution of Puerto Rico to change the current fiscal rule that is there. We need to, as the senator here was mentioning, we need to make more transitions so that people that are right now in government programs, they can complement their incomes and not being penalizados por estar trabajando. Y aquí, por ejemplo, en el caso de la construcción que tanto hemos hablado, la construcción es un empleo temporero. El proyecto dura 3, 6 meses, 1 año. Mientras que si no hay esa transición, pues estas personas pueden perder su acceso a su Medicaid, que aquí le llaman el plan vital, por varios años. Así que a muchas personas pues no les conviene. Le dicen, mira, yo sé construir, pero no voy a trabajar ahí porque por trabajar 3 meses voy a perder 2 seguros en lo que vuelvo a caer en el plan vital. Necesitamos mantener ese crédito al trabajo. Yo creo que es una de las mejores políticas que se han hecho en los últimos años. Para incentivar el trabajo y para reducir la desigualdad. Necesitamos mejorar las estadísticas. Hablamos mucho de estadísticas, pero en muchas estadísticas tienen problemas de cómo se están midiendo. Necesitamos sustituir más importaciones, necesitamos exportar más. Aquí casi no se habla de exportar y todas las economías de altos ingresos a nivel mundial, todas están orientadas a la exportación porque el mercado local es muy pequeño. Y eso es algo que tenemos que seguir enfatizando. Y para concluir, y me felicito porque no me cedí el tiempo, hay crecimiento económico en Puerto Rico, pero es bien tenue, bien efímero, y vamos a ver ese crecimiento prácticamente estacionario, cerca del 0% por varios años, mientras continúen esos fondos federales goteando de ese so-called pipeline. I would like to again pay attention to how accurate were those projections for the past few years, so that we, in the same manner, put weight on those forecasts. In terms of the Trump administration, I believe that we are living here in Puerto Rico in a much higher inflation than the one that is being measured, not just because of the tariff, but because also of the deportations. And that is going to raise wages, especially in the construction sector, and that is going to be, at the end of the day, translated into higher prices for other sectors. Interest rate, I don't believe is going to be cut, especially for the next couple of quarters. And it's going to be hard to find new additional federal funding. I know that we have become addicted to federal funding lately, and I'm not against. Actually, we need those federal funds to reconstruct our infrastructure. The bad side of it is that we put too much faith on that, and we cannot let go our productive sector. Tenemos que asegurarnos de que esta economía tenga esas bases productivas sólidas para cuando se acabe este tanque de oxígeno llamado fondos federales no recurrentes, la economía pueda continuar creciendo. Muchas gracias.
Gracias. Thank you. Do we have any questions?
Yeah, Professor, why, when you mentioned the online sales, porque usted dice que es un nuevo impuesto?
Sí, porque antes del 2017, pues, los consumidores estaban comprando más por internet, probablemente quizás más que ahora, para evadir el pago no evadir, evitar el pago de impuestos, y de ahí, y eso no es solamente lo que comprábamos, libros y ese tipo de cosas, gente que compraba piezas de auto, piezas de enseres, piezas para sus hogares, etcétera. En la medida de que ahora casi todo que se paga por internet a través de acuerdos que han logrado con Hacienda, se está cobrando impuestos, pues esas compras que antes no estaban pagando, ahora están pagando. Y el último dato que vi que de hecho no lo he visto en las últimas estadísticas que tiene el Departamento de Hacienda, pero el último que vi, que fue como del 2022 o 23, estaba cerca de los 200 millones, no sé en cuánto está en la actualidad.
Supera los 200 millones, pero esas compras desde el 2006, cuando se legisló el impuesto sobre ventas y uso, en teoría, una persona que hacía compras de manera remota por internet venía obligado a remitir al Departamento de Hacienda en su vertiente de uso.
Sí.
¿Qué fue lo que cambió? Una decisión del Tribunal Supremo de los Estados Unidos que dispuso que las jurisdicciones pudieran exigir a estas plataformas donde se hacen estas compras que pudieran retener el impuesto sobre la venta. Así que no necesariamente es una legislación que estableció un nuevo impuesto, porque desde su origen, desde que se legisló, técnicamente la obligación de reportar esa compra y ese IBU sobre su uso y remitirlo al departamento, pues la obligación estaba. Lo que hubo fue una decisión del Tribunal Supremo de los Estados Unidos y ciertamente un efectivo trabajo del Departamento de Hacienda de hacer valer esa captación de esas ventas, ese impuesto en esas ventas que se estaban haciendo por internet.
De acuerdo. Sí, ciertamente había una obligación, pero lo que yo quería referirme es que más allá de lo que dice el estatuto, si es de jure, si es de facto, hoy día cuando uno compara antes de 2017 con el periodo actual, pues uno ve un aumento en ese recaudo.
Sí, ciertamente hay un aumento en el recaudo, definitivo.
Y en ese sentido, si hablamos de neutralidad fiscal, pues si yo le estoy metiendo la mano en el bolsillo a la gente por un lado con los aranceles y con los impuestos al internet, lo ideal sería por otro lado darle un alivio.
Y es un planteamiento y lo tengo aquí al lado mío, es un planteamiento que se le ha hecho a la Junta de Supervisión Fiscal, que ese aumento en captación de los impuestos, pues que sea considerado como una fuente de financiamiento para algunas iniciativas en el gobierno de Puerto Rico, pero seguimos dando esa pelea.
Thank you, Secretario. Do we have any other questions?
Sí, director Topal, aquí una sola pregunta para el señor Caraballo Cueto o para el secretario de Hacienda. ¿Cuánto esperan que el gobierno capte este año derivado del Puerto Rico Trust Fund? O si ya captó el gobierno, ¿cuál sería la cuantía? Si tienen el dato, por supuesto.
Bueno, yo de hecho a mí me costó bastante trabajo conseguir cuál era el dato, porque no estaban claros incluso ni funcionarios aquí a nivel de Puerto Rico si estaba llegando o no estaba llegando. Así que en la medida de que el gobierno federal, que eso, como dijo el primer presentador, ha habido mucha incertidumbre en términos de cuánto van a ser los aranceles, ha habido un sub y baja de la tasa, pero en la medida de que se mantengan esas tasas, por lo menos en el nivel que estuvieron antes de que terminara el año fiscal 2025, pues es probable que entonces se mantenga al menos ese mismo nivel de recaudo de los 285 millones. Sin embargo, si continúa pues una guerra comercial con algunos países, en particular con China, donde Puerto Rico importa bastante, pues es posible que eso incluso sea mayor.
Saludos, Orlando Rivera, director de Oficina de Gerencia y Presupuesto por acá. Actualmente, relacionado al Puerto Rico Trust Fund, se han recibido unos 300 millones durante este año fiscal y se espera que se reciban unos 500 millones. Esto ya es una notificación oficial que ha realizado el gobierno federal al gobierno de Puerto Rico.
Excelente. ¿Y ese dato yo lo puedo conseguir en alguna página?
Una vez, ¿verdad?, se materialice la oficialidad del gobierno federal, pues sí se estará publicando en nuestras páginas.
Muy bien, gracias.
Gracias.
First, I just want to recognize the Speaker of the House, who's just arrived, the Honorable Johnny Mendez. Welcome, and thank you for joining us. We're in the middle of a Q&A, so Don't worry if you want to make, okay. A couple things just to clarify. This is an economic forecasting conference, and I say it's the foundation of the beginning of the budget process because we use the economic forecast as an input into the revenue forecast. And then the revenue forecast, this is a little budget 101. The revenue forecast is then an input to the budget process. So notwithstanding what happens in the economy, there's always a question of what happened in the economy and how did that impact revenues? They're correlated, but they don't necessarily go together all the time. And everyone spends, and if you saw the first presentation was, we thought this was going to happen and all of this happened, but here we are. And then the economists spend a lot of time trying to figure out what actually impacted what. Tariff situation fluctuates. We talk about the PR trust fund and potential additional revenues. The revenues in hand are the ones we have. There's volatility there. They could change. Are they recurring? These are all the things that we have to take into account. But the critical part is, when we talk about budgeting, is what are the revenues going to look like? And then how much do we have to spend responsibly? And in budgeting, you can always, overperformance is a good thing, right? So, because you don't want to spend more than you have, right? So you get a bill at home and you can't pay it, you have a problem. If your revenues come in higher, that's not the worst problem. Then we can figure out what other things we should do. Should we save it? Should we spend it on something? Or should we go and securitize it for spending in the future many things? That is the discipline that this is, part of. And so when we talk about most states, and I hesitate to say all because I don't have the facts, require balanced budgets. Balanced budgets generally, most businesses require balanced budgets. I would say most of you at home try to balance your budgets. Some nations, and we distinguish, because when we say we want to, what we're talking about here, and some people talking about, is deficit spending. The federal government can spend more than they have because they print money. Other nation states can spend more than they have because they print money. There are impacts of that. Puerto Rico for 20 years spent more than they had, but we couldn't print money, so we issued debt. And that's why we're actually here, right? Because we had a massive amount of debt. We've corrected that. Working together with the government, we've corrected that. But the implication that we should go back to potentially spending more than we have, right, is something that, we should have a discussion about. And if you can't print money, the only way to do that would mean that you saved money when you had overperformance, right? So the only way to do this is to make sure you have reserves.
That's the counter-cyclical.
Right, I understand. So that would mean you have to have reserves to do that, which goes to the other point, which is then you can't spend all that you have in any given year, because the point is build up reserves so that when there is a blip in the economy, when there is a downturn, you have reserves to do that. Yep. So our challenge here is what the revenue numbers are, how much do we spend on a recurring basis, how much do we put into reserves, and then how much do we keep or maintain for liabilities that we know we have and are coming, so that we have the money set aside for that, because that's not really then a reserve, right? That's money set aside for a bill that we know is coming. And so this is the discipline of budget reform as we're going forward. And here in the last few years, that has been done. legislation here and there where we may disagree, but as a general matter, that has been done. When it comes to revenue forecast post-22, since it was raised, there was an extraordinary amount of noise post-COVID. Federal government injected an enormous amount of revenue into the system, nationally and here in Puerto Rico. And that threw off all forecasts. So post-22, post-23, people projected, massive declines. It turned out to be the exact opposite. So those are the challenges that we're facing right now. Today, our revenue forecast, again, not the economic forecast, our revenue forecast seems to be very close to what we think it's going to end at, within $100, $200 million, which is relatively close. The goal is not to be correct, and I always, with the economists, it's never who's right or it's who's less wrong at times, right? Because no one's going to hit it right on. If we could hit it right on, none of us would be sitting at these tables, right? But that's where we are. Within $100 or $200 million on the revenue forecast is probably where we're going to be. On a budget the size of a general fund of over $13 billion, it's good. And we may have underestimated before. But when you underestimate revenues, all that means is the money stays with the people of Puerto Rico. You have it to spend in the next year. And then the question is, do you spend it on recurring things? Do you spend it on one-time things? But we are still not fully out of the bankruptcy, right? We still have all looming PREPA bankruptcy out there, and there are going to be some tough decisions that have to be made around that. Lots of people have opinions about how those bills should be paid, and that's a question we have to have because those are big numbers. So the foundation principle is let's have an open, honest discussion about the revenue forecasts, right? And this is why we want diverse opinions here talking. But let's remember, this is part of the budget exercise is the critical exercise. And the same kind of attention that we're doing here, we should pay attention there and just recognize all of the things that we've spoken about, a lot of things on this panel. Many of them either decrease revenues or increase spending. All of those we just have to add up and then figure out what we can and can't do. The good news I was working on the colleagues sitting on both left and right and outside of this room. People are very responsible and are paying attention to these issues that we're bringing to light. So I want to thank you, but I want to also just point out the budgeting aspect. The economy is going to happen one way or the other, and as many of them pointed out, we don't control many of those things. They're not within our control. What is within our control is how much we spend and the commitments that we make and the budgets, and that's entirely under our control. If we don't, we're going to go to the next presenter, Xavier Divi. He's the director of V2A Consulting. And this is the conclusion of our presentations. We're going to conclude with a little bit different perspective, a perspective of business and market analytics perspective. Xavier, he's the director of V2A Consulting, and he leads the firm's market and business analytics practice, overseeing economic research related to Puerto Rico, including predictive modeling, market intelligence, and geographic analysis. So with that, Director, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thanks a lot for the invitation, and muchas gracias. I'm going to be talking about two things, the economic trends and the outlook for 2026 as part of the work to do the forecast of the budget of 2026 year. As you know, the Puerto Rico economy had an economic depression starting in 2006, where we lost we reduced more than 20% on an annual basis our GDP output. We had the hurricanes Irma and Maria and the pandemic, and we saw a swift recovery after that to levels that were above what we had seen previous to the pandemic. But in the past year and a half, 2 years, the economic activity has slowed down. It has stalled, as you can see in the left-hand side chart. One of the main drivers, as my colleagues were mentioning, have been for this recovery after the pandemic, have been the substantial increase in inflows from the federal government, which have more than doubled between 2017 and 2025. And that's actually a challenge for the Puerto Rico economy because most of them were non-recurrent, and we'll see how we adapt our economy to a progressive reduction in those funds in the coming years. The truth is that not only we experienced an initial recovery thanks through these inflows, but also the liquidity of businesses and the Puerto Rico families increased substantially between 2019 and 2021. The deposits in local banks and in credit unions increased by 20 billion between those 2 years. And although they have reduced, as I think Leslie was mentioning, they're still high, and we still see these deposits above pre-pandemic levels. The total employment, as was mentioned after the pandemic, has experienced an important increase. We have more employees today than we've had in the past decades. And the positive thing is that it's been driven by the private sector, right? The total public employment versus or as a percentage to the total employment has decreased from what we used to have in 35% in the 1990s to 21% nowadays. It's true that in recent months and the past year, the increase in employment has been slowing down, but still growing. Which are the main sectors that have been driving the increase in total employment? Well, if we look at it since the pandemic, the truth is it's been across the board, across industries. Maybe we should mention the tourism sector, which has been booming in the past years. The construction sector, obviously, through the reconstruction efforts in Puerto Rico after the pandemic, has also been a driver of employment growth. And the third one that we see here as well is the business services, which are, many of them are around the support for the reconstruction efforts, being engineering companies, architects, project management, consulting, legal, accounting, these type of jobs. But in the past year, the results are more mixed. We have several industries that actually have reduced their total employment, but good news is the tourism sector has continued to be an important driver of employment growth in Puerto Rico. Regarding consumption, as we've seen in the economic activity and also in the slowdown of employment growth, we saw a jump after the pandemic, driven mainly by the higher liquidity of families and after the inflows coming from the federal government, but it has slowed down also, and actually it has increased in the past year less than the inflation, which we know it's probably understated. The average salary in Puerto Rico has, as I think Leslie was mentioning that as well, has been growing faster than the inflation level. So that means that we've had a real purchasing power increase in recent years, which has added also to the high levels of liquidity that we see in the deposits in local banks. So in general, the main messages regarding recent economic activity is that it has stalled after a period of important increase after the pandemic. But still the balance sheet of businesses and families, we see it at a better shape than what we had in other periods in our history. Looking at looking at the 2026 outlook, there are several factors that are important in order to know which may be the impact on the Puerto Rico government. Obviously, the U.S., what happens with the U.S. economy has an impact on Puerto Rico because of the ties that we have with the U.S. economy. Most forecasts, and we saw the first presentation, go around 2 to 3% real GDP growth in the U.S., which is not far from what we saw in 2025. We are likely to continue seeing some economic uncertainty and geopolitical uncertainty, which is not going to be much different from what we saw in 2025 also, so not much difference in that area against the last year. Regarding federal funding, the truth is that at this time last year we had drastic or important concerns about potential drastic reductions in the federal funds at the U.S. level, but also impacting Puerto Rico. The truth is that uncertainty has reduced, or that risk has reduced. So in that sense, we have to be a little bit more positive. Regarding the third aspect that we are using for our forecast, the increase in trade tariffs, obviously this has an important impact for Puerto Rico. More than 40% of the food that we purchase in Puerto Rico comes from third countries. So obviously the tariffs are going to have an impact on the budget of our consumers. What we saw in 2025 is that initially a good portion of those increases were absorbed by the businesses. That happens sometimes when these tariffs increase, and there are studies in the U.S. that show how that happened. But normally, as time goes by, the businesses start translating more and more those increases to the final prices, and we expect that to happen more in 2026. So our outlook in this sense is a little bit more pessimistic than what we had last year. The next one has to do with the tourism business, which has been, as I was mentioning, it has been booming, has been a very important driver for the Puerto Rico economy. We had a record year last year in terms of visitors. We expect the tourism sector to continue to be an important driver, probably not at the growth levels that we've seen in previous years. We know that based on surveys performed today in the U.S., that the U.S. families are more concerned about their budget and they're looking for so that on visitors to Puerto Rico, but we expect to be high compared to as well. And finally, the reshoring process after the increase in the tariffs seems to be starting to happen. Last year was a record year in Puerto Rico in terms of investments, or relocating some plants in Puerto Rico. We have to be cautious about that. Puerto Rico has important infrastructural limitations and concerns, and the trade tariff policy is quite volatile at the moment. So it's not the decisions by executives on a long-term basis require more certainty in that sense. So we will need to be cautious about seeing this reshoring trend continue in Puerto Rico. So all in all, our outlook for 2026 is for an economy to be flat against 2025 in our base case scenario, which is similar to what other economists have been talking about today. Looking at a more long-term basis, obviously we need to look for an economy that is growing on a sustained basis and less dependent on external help. And for that, it is important to have, radical or meaningful structural changes in the local economy. We have some of them here. I'm not going to go over all of them, but we are positive around some of them. The fiscal discipline, I mean, we're very positive about that. We finally have a first balanced fiscal budget after, I believe, we're 16 consecutive fiscal deficits before Promesa, which is not sustainable, and we know the consequence of doing that. Maybe the one where we are more pessimistic is in the measures to make our economy or our market more free, have more economic freedom. We continue to be one of the most regulated markets in the U.S. We rank last in almost all surveys that are done in the U.S. regarding ease of doing business in Puerto Rico. We have a permitting system that is cumbersome, is bureaucratic. The property registration system is expensive and also cumbersome. We regulate more than 130 professions in Puerto Rico. 13 of them are not regulated in any other state in the US. 34, I believe, are regulated only in 5 states or less in the US. Our tax system is complex as well, and the tax burden is high, despite the fact that we do not pay federal taxes. So in this sense, economic freedom should be probably one of the priorities going forward to make the economy more dynamic and to have an economy that has more business opportunities for local investors and outside investors as well. Regarding the human capital, we know that that the educational attainment in Puerto Rico and the educational results in Puerto Rico are below what we see in the US states and in the US in general. And this is not a problem of budget. We have a budget per student that is comparable to many states in the United States. So it has more to do with the allocation of that budget, that goes maybe in a big portion to centralized entities rather than going directly to the schools, to the teachers, and to the student. So there has to be some job to do. There are discussions around that, and there's probably going to be changes, but it's something that we should be looking at. Obviously, the infrastructural problems that we have, we've been underinvesting in our infrastructure for a lot of years, and that requires putting money on making it more functional and more reliable. So we hope to see that improving also going forward. And we know there is a big federal budget committed to the reconstruction of the electrical system. And finally, obviously, the population growth, which is probably the result of not having an economy that is dynamic, that provides the opportunities to our entrepreneurs or professionals, and with changes in making our market more dynamic and freer, make our young professionals and entrepreneurs stay in Puerto Rico, not having to move outside. So basically, that's our outlook also for the more longer term view of Puerto Rico. Eso es todo. Gracias por el tiempo que nos han dado.
Gracias. Do we have any questions? It's the benefit of being last, is that maybe people are tired and don't have any questions. Thank you. Thank you very much, and thank you for that other perspective and pointing out some of the things. I think many of those things we're trying to address right now, so I appreciate it. Any further questions from anyone at the table? No. Any questions for anyone in the audience? If anyone has any questions, or a few minutes from any questions.
Back up. Representative Joe Frankie, you can back up.
There we go.
Okay, thank you. As you said before, if Puerto Rico budget has a surplus of money, you said what we're going to do with that money. Use it, invest it, or leave it over there to the future if there is needed. The thing is that when you put the money in the bank and they have no interest, you are losing money, like the federal funds in the future. Mm-hmm. The money, you can buy less because of the inflation. So where the money of the people of Puerto Rico is put on, in what accounts, and what percentage of interest is given to the people of Puerto Rico, that we are not losing money every year because of the inflation of the money. That's why I'm worried, because if we leave the money just in accounts over there, that money is going to buy less in the future, or it's better to invest it now in the economy.
Sure. It's a standard practice to build up reserves when you have the funds. And Puerto Rico, particularly, according to the IMF, as everyone knows, we're in a hurricane zone. We've set aside $1.3 billion to deal with emergencies that result from storms. And the government periodically has accessed those funds and replenished them, as you know. Puerto Rico actually has a reserve fund on the books that's been there for years, that also hasn't been funded for years, which is something we need to revisit. And then there's rainy day funds, which are for when the economy goes down, and as the professor mentioned, what you would do, how you would access those funds when there's a revenue shortfall or a revenue downturn. If you look at the size of Puerto Rico's budget, that would be sized at close to $1.7 billion. And we don't have that reserve in place. So these are standards that would help you not go into the problems that we had before, because you deal with these things. And then potentially you access, if you write the law correctly, you'd be able to access it during an economic downturn, to your point, because sometimes, and I don't disagree with you, the worst thing that you have to do is have to do budget cuts, severe budget cuts, at a time when people are suffering the most. And if you have the reserves in place, you could use that as a buffer to growth. But that requires you to have the money set aside, $1.7 billion, which is what the standard practice would be. We're going to have another symposium on budgeting in April, and those are the kinds of things we'll talk about there. But your point was about the interest rate. I have the Treasury Secretary here, who's in charge of keeping all the money, and we do get interest on the accounts. It's liquid, and we are earning the interest, and that interest does accrue to the people of Puerto Rico. It's been hundreds of millions of dollars, and that becomes part of the revenues that we have. Could we get better interest rates? I'm all for it. We invested in the banks in Puerto Rico, so that's part of it. But I don't know if you have any thoughts on, is there a way to get better interest rates on the monies that we're doing? But it's sitting here in our banks, here locally, which presumably is also helping the economy. But I'm always in favor of getting the best interest rates that we possibly can, because we can use that money.
Yes, a couple of years ago, there was we sat with the financial institutions and revisited the interest rates that were being provided to the government of Puerto Rico. And although at that time the most competitive rates were not the ones that the government was receiving from the financial institutions, that was renegotiated. Obviously, the interest rates can fluctuate for each quarter, even on an annual basis. And that's something that we need to monitor and sit down with the financial institutions to ensure and make sure that the government is receiving the best interest rates in the market. But that was renegotiated a couple of years back. And I think from a competitive standpoint on the best rates out there in the market, the government of Puerto Rico, in terms of the general fund, is is well positioned in terms of what the interest rates we're receiving right now.
Yeah, and this is the kind of information they say, you know, transparency is best, right? This information should be public. You should see them, you know, and it's welcome discussion on, you know, if there are ways to improve that. It's hard. You can only get what the institutions are willing to give you. Any other questions? Espera un momento para mi micrófono. Gracias.
Para efectos del récord, Edwin García Feliciano, procurador del ciudadano. Históricamente no hemos visto que se haya separado en los presupuestos ni en ningún otro lado dinero para la inversión económica. O sea, dinero que podamos poner a disposición para aquellos que quieran ser nuevos emprendedores. Sí hay actividades pequeñas que se hacen, pero no necesariamente a gran escala. No hemos tocado aquí la economía informal. ¿Cuál es el efecto de la economía informal en el asunto del desarrollo económico de Puerto Rico? Aunque hablamos de 5 planes de desarrollo económico, a veces uno quisiera pensar en un plan de desarrollo o en el que sea, que lo conozca todo el mundo, que yo como padre sepa hacia dónde camina la economía de Puerto Rico y que pueda pensar en mis hijos y decir, bueno, pues la economía va en esta dirección, la universidad tiene que ir en esa dirección, yo quiero que mis hijos tengan claro cuál es la dirección que va el país, pero como que a veces eso no percola hacia la población. Lo saben algunos sectores, quizás los que preparan el plan y el gobierno, pero no necesariamente la población en términos generales, y que estos foros, no solamente, es una recomendación que le hago al director ejecutivo, no solamente en San Juan, me parece que es momento. Y recuerdo un foro que hizo el exgobernador Acevedo Vilá en el Centro Ferial de Ponce, extraordinario, hace muchos años. Yo creo que tiene que llegar a las regiones, que este tipo de actividad debe llegar a todas las regiones de Puerto Rico. La estrategia para la región sureste de Puerto Rico, la región más pobre de Puerto Rico a través de toda la historia. Años llevamos diciendo lo mismo, pero no hay ni siquiera un plan de desarrollo especial para esa región sureste de Puerto Rico. Sobre 500 escuelas abandonadas en Puerto Rico, hemos planteado desde la oficina el aspecto de desarrollarlas para vivienda, demolerlas. Como la escuela no está cerca quizás de ninguno de nosotros, el adefesio que queda allí, pues estamos todos felices, porque la escuela no está al lado de mi casa, no está al lado de la suya, ni la desarrollar para efectos de vivienda o de otra actividad económica si quisiera. El aspecto que mencionaba Caraballo Cueto de las exenciones contributivas, y yo recuerdo en 1989 cuando el exalcalde de Camuy ganó las elecciones allí, fue una de las primeras cosas que nosotros le cuestionamos al gobierno. Porque del análisis que hacíamos, industrias que decían que iban a generar 200 empleos terminaban generando 100. Eso le restaba a la patente municipal porque el incentivo contributivo de alguna manera eliminaba prácticamente la patente municipal. Lo que terminaba llegando era muy poco. Yo sé que hablamos de, a veces, algunos hablan de que el gobierno es muy grande. Puede ser que en algunas áreas del sector privado lo sea. Ciertamente es importante el desarrollo económico, pero el gobierno también tiene una función de servirle a la ciudadanía. Nosotros atendemos todos los años 30.000 personas que llegan hasta nuestra oficina porque alguna agencia de la rama ejecutiva, de las cerca de 130 agencias de la rama ejecutiva, no lo han atendido. Así que es importante porque el gobierno no solamente está hecho para atender la situación económica de Puerto Rico, sino también para que podamos atender al ciudadano, que es la razón de ser de cualquier gobierno. Así que quería hacer esas expresiones con mucho respeto.
Thank you for those observations. And again, now is the time when we are doing the budget to address these things if we're going to get them in the budget. If we don't do them in the budgets, right, they're not going to get done. We don't have the money to do them later. So we'll work with the representatives to make these a priority. Should we set money aside for economic development? Yeah, we should. All of these things require, right, there's establishing priorities. If we're going to set it aside for this, right, it's not available for other things. But we think permanent infrastructure that are going to impact Puerto Rico's economy over the long term, arguably those should be the priorities when you have one-time funds. Okay, if we conclude today's Economic Forecast Symposium, I want to thank the economists for participating. I want to thank our government leaders for participating, the legislative participants who spent the time here for their thoughtful contributions. And just remember, consensus, we want to have a consensus forecasting process, but consensus does not mean unanimity. It means that we're going to have a shared starting point. And the perspectives shared today are an essential part of developing a transparent, credible, informed macroeconomic forecast that will support the fiscal planning and Puerto Rico's ongoing fiscal transformation. This symposium lays the foundation for better budgets, better decisions, and a more stable fiscal future for Puerto Rico. Future symposiums will include, we hope, working together, economic and revenue projections as a critical element in the government budget's fiscal plan process. The Oversight Board has already begun macroeconomic and revenue modeling working sessions with the government officials to design a locally driven model to forecast into the future that is improved over what was in the past. We've seen a strong commitment from the executive and have dedicated government resources to achieve long-lasting success in this area. But it's critically important, and people ask what needs to get done. Institutionalizing permanent budget reforms are essential for sustaining fiscal stability once the Oversight Board's supervision ends. It will enable Puerto Rico to produce balanced budgets independently, sustain fiscal responsibility, and regain market access. But gaining market access means regaining market confidence so that we don't return to the pre-crisis practices. You need people who are invested in this. You need process improvements that we're working on. And then you have technology improvements and systems. And we're making the investments to do that. Those are the pillars of fiscal discipline and sustained fiscal stability, in addition to reliable economic and revenue forecasting based on best practices. This means that we have to have a disciplined budgeting practices across all agencies and transparent reporting practices. We're working on them. We need a capital plan. This is one of the things that were mentioned. Are we investing in these areas beyond the federal funds, which will go away for recovery? Puerto Rico needs to have a funded capital plan. And right now we don't have access to the credit markets. So that means that we're going to have to fund it with local resources. That's part of what we're talking about here with our current dollars. If there are current dollars available, how much are we going to set aside for economic development, for infrastructure, until we can regain access to the credit markets, because it's not all federal funds. And then we have an integrated accounting system, which we hope is going to be launched very soon. But the Hacienda and OEP are working on that. Our next symposium will be on budget transformation, and we will explore the other critical elements of budget reform. So we hope to see all of you then. Stay tuned for more details. And today we really appreciate your participation. It's been longer than we anticipated, the level of engagement, the attention, and we look forward to continuing a dialogue as part of our collective responsibility for Puerto Rico's future. I want to thank, again, the Senate for providing this beautiful space that we celebrate this important event. So thank you, and this concludes today's symposium. Gracias a todos.